after countless craftsmen had disassembled and studied it. Although they didn't know what a lathe was and couldn't successfully imitate it, the principles behind it had been researched by smart people, and the performance of firearms had improved. It was just that the ammunition was still iron bullets. Obviously, with their strength and technology, it was impossible to make real firearms bullets. Even so, this kind of improvement could be said to be obvious. At least, it was much better than in history. However, compared to the Cold Front soldiers, the difference was not small. Just in terms of the range of a firearm, the difference between them was like heaven and earth. For some reason, the five-star army had now eliminated the Type 81 automatic rifle. First of all, it was not easy to make a lathe. Since they were going to imitate it, they might as well imitate the Type 95 automatic rifle. Therefore, the Type 81 automatic rifle quickly left the stage and was mostly stored in Yang Qindong's warehouse. After the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard Division were all equipped with their Type 95 submachine guns, their firing range was around 400 meters. An effective range of 300 meters was not a problem. This time, the division headquarters had requested for the enemy to be 200 meters away, which undoubtedly increased their accuracy. This allowed Lu Wu to completely grasp the rhythm of the battle. When Xiao Yining arrived with the division headquarters, the soldiers of the other regiments had already repelled the Ming army's first attack. Under the hail of bullets, more than 1,000 Ming soldiers were thrown to the ground. The Cold Front soldiers very well carried out the orders of the division headquarters. They tried their best to injure the enemy instead of killing them. As a result, they killed fewer people and injured more people, which affected the morale of the soldiers even more. At this time, the thousands of northern Ming soldiers who were wailing at the foot of the city walls were an example. With the existence of these wounded soldiers, the other northern Ming soldiers turned pale with fright. They didn't know if they would end up like this the next time they charged. There were also some lucky Ming soldiers who were rescued by their comrades and brought back to the barracks. However, they were still injured. Their cries of pain were heard by the other Ming army soldiers at such a close distance. Because of this, the morale of the soldiers plummeted. Many of them showed fear in their eyes. Some were even tired of fighting. In contrast, the morale of the soldiers of the 5th Division was high. In the previous wave of attacks, not a single Ming army soldier was able to get within 150 meters of them. This meant that their firearms did not pose any threat at all. Other than wasting some bullets, the entire 5th Division did not have a single injured soldier. The morale of the soldiers was getting higher and higher. Why is the division commander here? When Dang Liming saw Xiao Yining standing beside him, a confused expression appeared on his face. "All right, I'm here to train the division's marksmanship. I won't steal your credit." Seeing Dang Liming's intention, Xiao Yining shook his head helplessly and asked, "How is it? How are the results? Did we suffer any losses?" Knowing that Xiao Yining was not here to steal his credit, Dang Liming's expression immediately brightened. He patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, the Ming army will not be able to get close to us. Furthermore, we have the battlements to defend ourselves. They are standing on open ground. This is just a target practice. The soldiers will not be in any danger." "Good." Xiao Yining's face lit up. Every Cold Vanguard soldier was carefully selected from the Han people. Most of them were originally from Crimson Castle and Ryukyu Island. If there were any casualties, he would not be able to explain it to their families. Although it was inevitable that there would be casualties in war, Xiao Yining still hoped that there would be fewer deaths. This way, he would be able to explain it to his family. While the two were talking, the Ming army's second charge began. Compared to the previous charge of thousands of soldiers, this time there were only a few hundred soldiers. It felt more like a probing attack. Damn it, how are we going to fight with so few people? Seeing that there were less than 1,000 soldiers, Dang Liming's face was filled with displeasure. Perhaps he wished that more than 10,000 soldiers from the Biming firearms camp would charge forward. That way, he could kill to his heart's content. Xiao Yining, who also saw this scene, patted Dang Liming's head. All right, the enemy has their own way of fighting. Immediately pass down the order. The 1st Regiment, 1st Battalion, and the division headquarters are responsible for shooting. Everyone else, stop. Since the number of enemies was small, it would be too wasteful if they fired all at once. It was better to fire one battalion at a time. That way, they could make a comparison and even have a competition on the battlefield to increase everyone's enthusiasm. Naturally, the division headquarters was included. This meant that they were mixing in personal goods. The other regimental commanders could not refuse. If they refused and angered Xiao Yining, he might not even give them a chance to kill the enemy. That would be unbearable. The competition between the battalions began. No matter how many soldiers from the Biming army came, the distance of 200 to 150 meters was their life and death line. No one could rush over, let alone launch a counterattack. Not only that, after a few short charges, more and more soldiers from the Biming army could run back without being injured. So much so that the wounded soldiers of the Biming army were thrown under the city gate tower. When everyone screamed in pain, the other Biming army soldiers did not dare to come forward. They were afraid that they would be one of them. The firearms camp did not play its role as expected. Instead, they were beaten into idiots. They did not even have the ability to fight back. This made Gao Yu, who was the army supervisor, very angry. However, what made him even more dissatisfied was that as the 2 cavalry armies under the new army continued to penetrate and cut through, he actually lost another 10,000 or so infantrymen at daybreak the next day. Moreover, most of them were injured soldiers. The number of people who truly died in battle was few and far between. It was precisely because there were too many injured soldiers in the barracks. It was more than 1/3 of the total number of soldiers. The wails and screams of pain were endless. It was like purgatory on earth. It made people's faces change greatly. The morale of the soldiers was greatly shaken. At this moment, if there were no reinforcements, the more than 100,000 Biming army would collapse. Reinforcements? Where are the reinforcements? Looking back, Gao Yu's eyes flashed. At this moment, he finally knew the power of the 5-star army. He also began to regret that he took the initiative to go out of the city to fight. If he stayed in Talis City, would it be much safer? Talis City. When the 80,000 reinforcements left the city, the commander of the new 2nd Army led the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division to camp in the city. The military tents were connected to one another, and countless cavalrymen were constantly wandering around. This momentum frightened the northern Ming soldiers who were guarding the city. They also began to realize that the soldiers who had left the city were in danger. Knowing that the Biming army outside the city may be very dangerous, whether to kill them or not became the problem that the Biming General Zhan Peng needed to consider. He had climbed up the city tower and roughly looked at the 5-star army cavalry below the city. There were only 10,000 people. If it was only a comparison of forces, they still had a certain advantage. However, war could not be calculated like this. It had to be considered from many aspects. For example, the other side was all cavalry. They could participate in the battle. However, a part of them needed to stay in the city to defend the city. They could not all go to the battlefield. This made the gap between the two sides shrink a lot. Chapter 1330. The 5-star army was all cavalry and they were infantry, which was a natural disadvantage. Outside of Talis City was a vast grassland. This kind of terrain was suitable for cavalry to spread out and attack. In contrast, infantry were at a disadvantage and lost for a while. Under all kinds of reasons, Zhang Peng came to a conclusion. If they went out of the city, there was a high chance that they would be defeated. If they didn't do well, they might even lose Talis City. Zhang Peng, who was shocked by this conclusion, was even less likely to send reinforcements out of the city. He just sent out several carrier pigeons to inform Gao Yu, who was at the beginning of the city, of his difficulties and predicament. At the same time, he also sent people to the Wan Quan department in the rear. He wanted to report this matter to Admiral Shi Heng. It would be best if Shi Heng could stand up and lead the overall situation. That way, no matter what he did, his responsibility would become very small. Everyone had selfish motives. Knowing that it was very dangerous to go out of the city, Zhang Peng, who wanted to shirk his responsibility, thought of asking Shi Heng to come out. After sending out several carrier pigeons, he waited for news in the city. After a sleepless night, the next day at dawn, he didn't receive any news from his superior. A chiliarch guarding the city ran in front of him. General, quickly go and take a look. A lot of our defeated soldiers have come to the city. They are now being surrounded by the 5-star Army cavalry. What? Let's go. Hearing the change in the situation, Zhang Peng was shocked. He quickly went out of the mansion and went straight to the city tower. Running all the way to the top of the city tower, Zhang Peng looked up and saw a lot of soldiers wearing Ming army uniforms being cut up by the 5-star Army cavalry. They were surrounded and attacked with bows and arrows and sabers. In less than a quarter of an hour, at least several hundred Ming army soldiers were injured on the ground, wailing and screaming. General, look, the same colonel shouted. There are nearly 1,000 of them, and they're asking if we should open the gates or not. Are we going to open them or not? Yang Qi asked. General, look, there's a group of about 1,000 of them, and they're calling out to us. Zhang Peng stood behind the battlements and looked down. Sure enough, he saw a large group of people wearing Ming army uniforms arrive at the city gate. In comparison, their team still had some fighting power. At the very least, they were able to form a defensive formation. With their spears in front of them, they blocked the 5-star Army's cavalry from approaching. Even so, from time to time, 1 or 2 soldiers would be injured and fall to the ground. Fortunately, the young general in command of this army had some ability. Once there was a problem, he could always let someone else fill the position. The order of the army was still maintained. However, everyone knew that they wouldn't be able to hold on for long if this continued. Therefore, the young general kept raising his head and cursing. We're all comrades. Hurry up and open the city gates. Do you want to see so many of us die here? Hearing these angry curses, the Ming army guarding the city naturally didn't dare to do anything in private. However, most people still focused their gazes on Zhang Peng, waiting for this general to make a decision. At this moment, Zhang Peng's face was extremely conflicted. When Gao Yu left, she handed Talu City to him. That was a kind of trust, but also a kind of responsibility. Logically speaking, his main task was to defend the city and prevent it from being occupied by the 5-star Army. Once the city gates were opened, there would definitely be a certain amount of danger. However, looking at the other soldiers, if he really didn't save them, it would definitely chill the morale of the army. It would also be a heavy blow to his authority as a commander. If he didn't handle it well, the morale of the army would be in chaos. At that time, when he gave a military order, how many people would obey? General, please make a decision. At this moment, several Kiliarchs gathered around Zhang Peng. Their faces looked like they were willing to make a decision. They were all soldiers. Anyone could encounter danger. If they didn't save them now, then when they were in trouble one day, wouldn't others treat them the same way? In the long run, several young generals certainly hoped that Zhang Peng would help. This was not only saving others, but also saving themselves. Originally, Zhang Peng was very hesitant. Now that several Kiliarchs were pressuring him, the balance in his heart began to tilt. He asked in a deep voice, "If the city gates are opened, will the five-star army's cavalry charge into the city?" This meant that Zhang Peng was going to compromise. After hearing this, the other young generals' faces flashed with joy. A quick-witted Chiliarch quickly replied, "They shouldn't. We can use bows and arrows to attack. When the time comes, as long as the city gates are open fast enough, the five-star army won't be able to charge into the city." "That's right. General, look, the five-star army's cavalry doesn't seem to be paying attention to us. They probably don't think that we will open the city gates. There aren't many cavalry here, so our safety shouldn't be a problem." Another Chiliarch pointed below the city and explained to Zhang Peng. The other Kiliarchs also quickly explained the problem from various angles. All of them expressed the same meaning. That was, as long as they moved fast enough and were prepared, the five-star army wouldn't be able to enter the city. They wouldn't be able to take any advantage. Seeing that everyone was so confident, Zhang Peng took a deep breath and said, "Okay, this general believes you. Since that's the case, prepare enough bows and arrows. We will open the city gates in a while, but we must be fast. We can't let the enemy cavalry enter the city." Yes, Zhang Peng finally made a decision. The other Kiliarchs were also very happy. At this moment, they all cupped their fists and agreed. After all, their superior was benevolent. Just this point alone wasn't a bad thing for everyone. With this order, many archers appeared on the city walls of Tulu City. The city gates were also opened from the inside. Over 100 northern Ming soldiers took this opportunity to rush out of the city gates. They shouted to the 1,000 or so comrades who were standing behind them, quickly retreat. We have archers to cover you. Many thanks." The Chiliarch, who had been cursing nonstop, had a look of excitement on his face. He immediately ordered his soldiers to retreat into the open city gates. Behind them, the five-star army's cavalry that wanted to approach were forced back by the thousands of arrows from the city walls. It was like a net of arrows, making it impossible for anyone to enter. "Ha ha ha, it's done." Zhang Peng, who was nervously staring at the city walls, couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the 1,000 or so soldiers from the Ming army being rescued. No matter what, saving 1,000 people could be considered a meritorious service. At the same time, he would be able to find out what had happened outside from these people. He would be able to find out why the five-star army's cavalry had appeared and why the Ming army had been defeated. Before Zhang Peng could finish his sigh of relief, and before he could ask the retreating soldiers what happened outside, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. The five-star army's cavalry that was still far away suddenly gave up on surrounding the Ming soldiers. Instead, they angrily rushed towards the city gates that were slowly closing. "Ha ha ha, are they crazy? Isn't it too late to come now?" On top of the city walls, when they saw the five-star army's cavalry rushing towards them, the Ming army's Kiliarchs on top of the city walls laughed. They laughed at the stupidity of the five-star army. But soon, a piece of news hit their faces like a slap, causing their complexion to instantly change. "Not good. The Ming army that we rescued suddenly betrayed us. They injured our soldiers who were guarding the city gates. They occupied the place and guarded the gate. We can't get close for a while." "What?" Several Kiliarchs were surprised. They were all confused. They didn't understand why their own people would hurt their own people. They just saved these people. On the other hand, Zhang Peng suddenly thought of something after being shocked for a short while. He shouted loudly, "I'm afraid that those people aren't our comrades at all. They are the five-star army in disguise. Damn it, we've been tricked." "Quick, send troops down and take back the city gate. Close it. Be quick." At this time, Zhang Peng shouted in hindsight. However, how could it be so easy to turn the tables? Under the five-star army's long preparation, specifically under the new Second Army's commander, she's planning the moment they open the city gates, they were doomed to fail. Just last night, there were cavalry scouts who reported that they discovered many defeated Ming army infantrymen in the direction of Saihan Mountain. They asked for instructions on what to do. She was currently in the large tent when he was woken up. After hearing this news, he knew that the development of the war had already deviated from its original path. According to Yang Chendong's previous analysis, once the war started, the new Second Army's two cavalry divisions would face the danger of being attacked from two sides by the Ming army. Because of this, she decided to defend this place no matter what. With the cavalry he brought, he still had a certain advantage. However, when he really brought his troops to Tulu City, the Ming army's reaction was a bit unexpected. The Ming army inside the city actually didn't make any movements. They just stood on the city gate tower, allowing them to set up formations and set up tents. This was because the Ming army was scared. When he saw this change, she quickly made the decision to adapt to the changes on the battlefield. Perhaps the previous military plans were done well, but a general who couldn't adapt to changes wasn't a general. He was just a machine. From the possibility of being attacked from two sides to the current Ming army holding back their troops, the new Second Army's two cavalry divisions were safe. However, she wasn't satisfied with this result. He already began to boldly imagine if he could find an opportunity to capture Tulu City and completely cut off the several 100,000 Ming army's path of retreat. If he had made this suggestion before, it clearly wouldn't have been appropriate. But now, the cowardly behavior of the 50,000 infantrymen in Tulu City made she see hope. It was just that he couldn't immediately find a breakthrough point. The scouts who came to report in the middle of the night opened up a window in Shi Bi's heart, allowing him to see an opportunity and hope to attack Tulu City. Shi Bi called over the 1st Cavalry Division's commander Cao Cao and the 2nd Cavalry Division's commander Li Jun. After a round of discussion, the three of them decided to disguise themselves as the Ming army to trick the enemy into opening the city gates. After careful planning and good performance, the city gates were finally opened. When Xiao Chao appeared here with a spear in his hand, it gave birth to a feeling that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 men. As long as he was still alive, he would never allow the Ming army to take back the gate. "Soldiers, kill! We must hold on until the cavalry arrives. We can do it!" Xiao Chao shouted loudly to encourage his soldiers, raising their morale. Below the city gate tower, more and more Ming army were rushing over. General Zhang Peng had issued a death order. No matter what, they had to take back the city gate. For this, they didn't hesitate to pay any price. Zhang Peng was really anxious. Originally, he wanted to save people out of kindness. Of course, he also wanted to make a contribution. But who would have thought that the people he saved were the enemy? This was a serious dereliction of duty. If he couldn't drive these people out, once the city gate was broken, he would be the biggest sinner. Zhang Peng's desperate counterattack suddenly increased the pressure on Xiao Chao. He and his soldiers had no choice but to start a massacre. They weren't just hurting people, they were killing people. When their military uniforms were dyed red with blood, the corpses of Ming soldiers were piled up outside the city gate. This kind of ruthlessness finally shocked the Ming army, who were preparing to attack. Although these Biming army had also been trained, this was their first time on the battlefield. When the flesh and blood scattered all over the ground, the smell of blood assailed their nostrils. Many people vomited because of this. This was different from their usual training. It was also different from the fights between the common people. This was a battle of life and death. Once they rushed forward, they would often fight to the death. No one would not cherish their own life. The only difference was whether it was worth it or not. They only had limited military pay. Just because of the general's order, they had to pay with their own life. After they died, it was difficult to get any pension policy. After they died, their family would not be taken care of. So, why should they be bathed in blood and kill? Where did their hot blood come from? In contrast, Qiao Qiao and his soldiers didn't have these worries. The Yangtze government had a very sound pension policy for the soldiers. If you died in battle, your family would benefit. If you died because of meritorious service, your family would also follow you for a lifetime of glory. There were many benefits to meritorious service. If you died in battle, your family would also benefit a lot. This made everyone have no worries. Using their lives on the battlefield became a matter of course. When Qiao Qiao and his men were covered in blood, as if they had walked out of hell, they came to the front of the Biming army and shouted, "Who else is there?" The Biming army involuntarily began to retreat. This was a fear that came from the depths of their bones. "Go, go, go. Comrades, get out of the way. Our cavalry is coming." Just as Qiao Qiao and his soldiers were confronting the Biming army, behind them, the cavalry brothers of the new Second Army finally broke through the rain of arrows and entered the city gate. When the cavalry arrived, the situation on the battlefield changed dramatically. The cavalry borrowed the momentum of their horses. When they casually swung their sabers, they could carry a force of several hundred jin. Wherever they went, anyone who tried to resist was either cut in half or heavily injured by the charge of the war horse. This was the advantage cavalry had over infantry. The arrival of the cavalry meant that Tulu City was about to change hands. Run! Seeing that the cavalry had already begun to kill, the Biming army standing at the front fell in a short time. The rest of the Biming army scattered like birds and beasts after an unknown person shouted. They immediately fled in all directions. Zhang Peng, who was standing at the back of the army, saw everything clearly. He staggered and almost fainted on the ground. It was the personal guard beside him who supported him and advised, "General, the situation has changed. We should run. The strength of the five-star army's cavalry is not something we can resist. Even if we don't open the city gate, they will find a way to open it. Let's go." The words of comfort had some effect. Zhang Peng, who was already out of his wits, kept nodding. "Okay, let's retreat. Let's retreat." Zhang Peng escaped, taking advantage of the chaos when the cavalry entered the city. He escaped with 10,000 infantry. They ran straight to the capital head behind them. This was also the only northern Ming army that managed to escape from this battle. Following Zhang Peng's escape, Tulu City changed hands without anyone commanding it. She led the cavalry into the city and saw piles of provisions and gold and silver in the large warehouse. These were the provisions Biming army had prepared for their 400,000-strong army. Now, they had benefited the five-star army. She entered the city under the protection of a group of cavalry and entered Shi Heng's courtyard. Then, she sent a telegram to Yang Qindong. In this battle, she once again proved herself. It also proved that the new Second Army was a strong army that could fight. They completed their mission beyond expectations and made the impossible possible. They seized Tulu City and completely cut off the Biming army's path of retreat. When Yang Qindong received the telegram, he couldn't help but clap. That's right, Shirlyo's performance was very good. especially his reaction on the spot. Come, everyone in the army report to the new Second Army for commendation. Also, inform Shirlu to report all the meritorious officials in this battle. Yang Qindong's mood improved greatly because of this, his expression no longer as cold as before. Speaking of which, Yang Qindong's mood wasn't that good. It was all because of the telegram sent by the heavy cavalry regiment. They were surrounded by Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry. They were determined to live and die with the enemy. This telegram clearly stated their situation, but at the same time, it could also be said to be a resolute telegram. How could Yang Qindong agree that a heavy cavalry regiment was about to be wiped out? He immediately replied with a telegram, asking the regiment commander to hold on until reinforcements arrived. At the same time, he reported the situation to the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Regiment, and the division that were looking for Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry on the battlefield. He asked them to quickly provide support to the heavy cavalry regiment. After sending these telegrams, the news of Xi's victory came, making the angry Yang Qindong feel much better. Seeing that the new Second Army had made great contributions, Yang Qindong also felt a surge of hot blood in his body. He glanced at Beta Persei beside him and suddenly asked heroically, "Beta Persei, do you dare to fight the Liaodong cavalry with the young master?" Beta Persei was also a hot-blooded youth. After hearing this, his eyes lit up. He instinctively wanted to agree, but his mouth opened and he became hesitant. Of course, he himself wanted to fight Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry. This army was also famous. Beta Persei had long wanted to deal with them and let them know that there was always someone better. This was also what any 5-star army soldier wanted to do. But this matter involved Yang Qindong. It was completely different. As for how important Yang Qindong was now, there was no need to say more. It was not an exaggeration to say that if something happened to him now, Yang Xie would definitely be in chaos. Even the 5-star army would fall apart in an instant. In other words, at this time, anyone in Yang Xie could have a problem, but Yang Qindong couldn't and couldn't. Now, they only had 2,000 black cavalry soldiers with them. If they went to fight Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry with this small number of people, it would not be killing people, but arrogantly courting death. No. Beta Persei shook his head firmly. Why not? Although Yang Qindong knew the answer would be like this, he was still a little reluctant. Don't you have the guts? Chapter 1332. No, young master's body is priceless. How can he take risks so easily? Beta Persei said, unmoved. Yang Qindong did not back down because of this, and continued to persevere. How can it be called taking risks? With the protection of the strongest black cavalry in the world, how can it be dangerous? Or are you saying that you have no confidence in the black cavalry? Beta Persei quickly shook his head and said, how can I not have confidence? The black cavalry is the strongest army in the world. No one can compare to them. Ha ha. If that's the case, then what are you hesitating for? Since they are the strongest, young master, my safety is of course guaranteed, right? All right, gather the black cavalry immediately and set off with the young master to kill the enemy. Yang Qindong misunderstood Beta Persei's intention and laughed loudly before giving out orders. Soon, the first Captain Xiuvi, the second Captain Dao Xiao, and the others led the 2,000 black cavalry and appeared in front of Yang Qindong's tent. At this moment, seeing that Yang Qindong was about to leave the tent, Beta Persei was still loudly persuading him. Young master, you can't take risks. What do you mean by taking risks? We are going to kill the enemy. Let me tell you, young heir, this young master has already made up his mind. If you are still trying to persuade me, then after this battle, you should return to Crimson City. I think you have grown old, and your courage has shrunk." After coldly throwing down these words, Yang Chendong strode out of the large tent. Beta Persei could no longer persuade him after he said such words. He could only follow behind Yang Chendong. He had already decided that no matter what happened, he would stand in front of Yang Chendong. Even if it was dangerous, he would become a meat shield to protect the young master's safety. Yang Chendong, who was outside the tent, indicated that he wanted to enter the battlefield and find trouble with Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry. This order naturally caused the 2,000 black cavalry dragon guards to be extremely excited, although it was a very proud thing to be able to follow Yang Chendong. If there was a chance to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy, no one would refuse, because that was the battlefield that men should go to. That was the best place to prove themselves and show off. The 2,000 black cavalry, under Yang Chendong's encouragement, everyone's morale was high. Then they brought their equipment and rushed straight to the area where Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry might appear. Yang Chendong's trip was not only to kill the enemy, but also to use himself as bait. He believed that even if Fang Dingshan had the ability to endure, once he knew that he was here, he would definitely not be able to endure it and appear. Contact the other armies at any time and inform them of our location. Yang Chendong wasn't a hothead. He naturally knew the importance of safety. Using the advantage of the horses, the enemy charged 3 times and killed over 1,000 soldiers of the heavy cavalry regiment, while the enemy suffered less than 50 casualties. Windchaser, who did not have a horse, finally saw the weakness of his side. He knew that it was all because he wanted to quickly gain merit. He immediately sent the telegram to Yang Chendong and then had the soldiers form a circle with the horses in the center. They were ready to meet the enemy at any time. The Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry that surrounded them did not seem to be in a hurry. Other than using arrows, they did not charge. It was clear that they wanted to use up the remaining strength of the heavy cavalry regiment. After all, being surrounded, Windchaser and his soldiers could not get enough rest. In addition, they could not replenish their rations and water. After a long time, it could be said that they would collapse without a fight. Luo Baiquan clearly wanted to obtain victory without shedding a drop of blood. For this reason, they had waited for half a day. Once he found that the heavy cavalry regiment wanted to rest, he would order the cavalry to release their arrows and prepare to charge. After a few rounds, the heavy cavalry regiment was exhausted and the sky slowly darkened. But even after the sky darkened, the Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry still continued to attack. During this time, they took the opportunity to launch a cavalry charge and took the lives of another 500 soldiers. They left behind dozens of corpses and left. From dusk to dawn, the eyes of the heavy cavalry regiment soldiers who had endured through the night were blood red, and Windchaser was even more so. He had even thought of charging back more than once. The horses had recovered some strength after a night of rest, but Yang Chendong's telegram clearly told them to defend and wait for reinforcements. They could not charge. In the face of the 6th young master's orders, Windchaser did not dare to disobey. He could only hold on and hope that reinforcements would arrive sooner. But the grasslands were so big that even if the cavalry wanted to rush to the battlefield, it would take a long time. The heavy cavalry regiment was destined to continue waiting. Just like this, the sky darkened again. In the blink of an eye, it was day again. When the sky brightened, Windchaser forced himself to close his eyes to look at the situation of the Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry. He was shocked to find that the enemies that surrounded them had already retreated. They actually retreated? Windchaser's face was filled with confusion. He personally ordered a few cavalry to get on their horses to scout for information. He was worried that this was another enemy's plan to lower his guard and then counterattack. Not long after the cavalry left, they returned. This meant that there was not a single Biming Liaodong cavalry within 10 li of them. Although Windchaser did not know the reason, he knew that he was safe. He immediately ordered that other than sending out a few cavalry scouts, everyone else should take the time to rest. In this battle, more than half of the 5,000 heavy cavalry regiment's cavalry had died. They were almost crippled. The morale of the army was greatly affected. Their stamina was also greatly depleted. Right now, they needed a good rest. He slept from dawn to the afternoon until the scouts returned. They said that the new 101st Army commander had brought reinforcements 8 miles away. Windchaser hurriedly got up. Then he organized the troops and prepared to welcome them. At this time, Windchaser believed that the reason why the Biming Liaodong cavalry retreated was because they knew that the 101st Regiment was coming here. They knew that they were not a match, so they left. Just as he was thinking about how to thank the 101st Regiment commander Lu Zhua, a large group of cavalry appeared in his sight. Windchaser led a group of heavy cavalry soldiers to welcome them. When they were still some distance away, he stopped and got off his horse with a grateful expression. At the front of the cavalry was Commander Lu Zhua. At this time, he was anxiously galloping until he was less than 10 meters away from Windchaser and the others. Seeing that it was indeed Commander Lu Zhua, Windchaser quickly went to welcome him. When he was 3 meters away, he saluted and said with gratitude, "Commander Lu, thank you for coming to save the heavy cavalry regiment." "Thank you." Lu Zhua first looked behind Windchaser. When he saw that there were still 2,000 heavy cavalry soldiers, he let out a sigh of relief. Although this battle could be considered a heavy loss, the heavy cavalry regiment's foundation was still there. If they had enough time, they could recover their strength. Since the problem of the heavy cavalry regiment was solved, Lu Zhua's expression tensed up again. He looked at Windchaser and said, "You don't need to thank me. I don't have the ability to scare off the Biming Liaodong cavalry." Wind-chasing Wolf was at a loss when he heard this sentence. Lu Zhua knew that if he didn't explain, Windchaser wouldn't know what was going on. He said, "The one who really saved you was the 6th young master. He personally led 2,000 black cavalry soldiers into where the Biming Liaodong cavalry was. The reason why the Biming Liaodong cavalry left was to attack the 6th young master." What? Windchaser's eyes suddenly turned blood red. He looked at Lu Zhua and said loudly, "Commander Lu, please say it again." Chapter 1333. I said that in order to save you, the 6th young master took the initiative to appear on the battlefield and attracted the attention of Biming's Liaodong cavalry. The cavalry that surrounded you didn't leave because of our arrival. They left because of the 6th young master. Lu Zhua's expression didn't look too good, but he also knew that this matter wasn't Windchaser's fault. After all, Yang Qindong took the initiative to do this. Lu Zhua shouted happily, but Windchaser's face was already covered in tears. He didn't expect that in order to save him, the 6th young master would take the risk. In this case, he was such a bastard. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and gave himself a big slap. His 5 bright red fingers imprinted on his face. "Okay." Seeing Windchaser hurting himself, Lu Zhua shook his head. "Now is not the time for us to blame ourselves. How to save the 6th young master is the most important thing. I still have to lead the 101st Division forward. Since you are safe, go back to the first city and have a good rest." After saying this, Lu Zhua was ready to leave. In his eyes, saving Yang Qindong was the most important thing. But if he wanted to leave now, he needed Windchaser's permission. With a plop, Windchaser got off his horse and knelt in front of Lu Zhua's horse. Commander Lu, please allow me to go with you. Lu Shua was shocked by this kneeling. After understanding Windchaser's meaning, he had to shake his head. Captain Windchaser, I want you to go back and rest. This is what the 6th young master said in the telegram. What you should do now is to obey the military order. You understand? No. Windchaser shook his head with a painful expression. The 6th young master came to save me. How can I do nothing? How about this? The rest of the heavy cavalry regiment will go back and rest. I will go with you alone. Okay? At this moment, Windchaser had to follow Lu Shua even if he had to violate military orders. This was the only thing he could do. Lu Shua really wanted to say that it was hard to disobey military orders. However, looking at Jue Feng's tear-streaked face and red eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say those harsh words. He could only nod his head and say, "All right, then you'll go and follow behind this army commander." Mount Chiyun, although it was called a mountain, it was actually just a slightly higher hillside. It was located on the grassland, and there was nothing around it to block the view. Under the strong wind and sand, most of the trees on the mountain had withered, leaving only 3 to 5 even if they couldn't get
small
half
trees
of them
standing there.
It was enough
However,
to kill
due
their
to the high
heart's
terrain,
content.
there was not
Only
enough
a
water,
thick-skinned person,
so it was only
like
a matter
Beta
of time
Persei
before it
would
dried
think
up.
this way.
Yang
Perhaps
Chendong
chose
chose
to
to
set
set
up camp
Yang
here
Chendong's
for the
existence
2,000
was an
black
invincible
cavalry
legend.
soldiers.
As for the scouts
Firstly,
of Baiming,
the terrain here was
Liaodong
high,
heavy cavalry,
so they didn't have
they
to
left
worry about
excitedly
the
after seeing
Liaodong
Yang Chendong
cavalry
appear in
scouts
Qian Mountain,
not being able
and
to
reported
see
to
them.
Fang Dingshan, who was hiding in a mountain forest 80 miles away. Fang Dingshan was very cunning. He didn't stay with Gao Yu's hundreds of thousands of soldiers because he was afraid that he would be implicated by the other party. He was just an army supervisor who had never fought in a war. It didn't seem credible to say that he could defeat the 5-star army in one battle. However, Fang Dingshan didn't have the intention to dissuade Gao Yu. He didn't even look suspicious. He had his own calculations, or rather, he needed someone to attract the attention of the 5-star army. This would make it easier for him to do things. Things developed as he expected. The scouts reported that Gao Yu's situation wasn't very good. After the siege was blocked, the cannons were blown up. It was said that the 5-star army had surrounded them. It seemed that things weren't looking good for them. Fang Dingshan, who rejoiced at his foresight, immediately locked onto the 5-star army's heavy cavalry regiment and waited for the news of victory. Fang Dingshan was still very capable. At least, he had done a lot of work to understand the 5-star army. For example, the heavy cavalry regiment was one of the targets he carefully understood. Then, he found the weakness of the other party. It was because their equipment was heavy and they couldn't fight for a long time. After finding the weakness, he only needed to counteract it. This was how the heavy cavalry regiment was surrounded. Next, he just needed to wait for the good news. While waiting, a young scout with an excited face half knelt in front of him. "General, great news, great news." "Oh, has the heavy cavalry regiment already been devoured by us?" Fang Dingshan asked calmly. However, he wasn't that excited. Although it was a merit to take down a heavy cavalry regiment, the other party only had 5,000 cavalrymen after all. For him, who had 100,000 cavalrymen, it wasn't a big deal. No, the scout's face was still red because of his excitement. "General, we found Bagnam of Gojoseon." When he heard that they didn't destroy the heavy cavalry regiment, Fang Dingshan's face still had a trace of unhappiness. However, after that, he suddenly stood up with his eyes wide open. He asked, as if he didn't hear clearly, "Wait, what did you just say? Who did you find?" "General, we found Bagnam of Gojoseon. He only brought 2,000 black cavalry soldiers to Qian Mountain." The scout's voice rose an octave. They found Yang Chendong with only 2,000 cavalry soldiers. Chapter 1334. Fong Dingshan was worried that the one being surrounded was not Bugnam of Gojosian. If that was the case, not only would it be a joke, but it would also put the entire army in danger. Yes, the scout replied with a firm tone. This general has personally seen Bugnam of Gojosian. I will definitely not be mistaken. Good. Hearing such a firm reply, Fong Dingshan laughed heartily. He then patted the scout's shoulder with his right hand and said with satisfaction, You did well. This time, killing Bugnam of Gojosian will be a great achievement. Now, send out all the scouts. Once you discover any reinforcements from the 5-star army, report to me immediately. After receiving Fong Dingshan's encouragement and praise, the scout left with a face full of excitement. At this time, Fong Dingshan had already made up his mind. He wanted to surround Yang Qindong and kill him. He wanted to kill Bugnam of Gojosian and achieve a great achievement. When the emperor heard this news, he would definitely be very happy. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to be conferred a duke. Men, this general wants to immediately summon all the generals at home. On Chia Mountain, the black cavalry had already cut down many huge trees and placed them together to form a solid defensive wall. It was not like a trench where the trees were placed together to form a house. The large gaps were blocked with huge logs, leaving only a few small gaps for the muzzles to be placed. This way, it would not delay the shooting of the enemy and could also effectively block most of the arrows fired by the enemy. Buckets of clean water were also placed in the wooden huts. There were also prepared dried bacon, 5 meats, ham sausages, instant noodles, and some dry rations. Boxes of shiny yellow bullets were stacked together. There was even a large-scale toilet that had just been built not far away. Yang Qindong was clearly prepared for a long battle. What bullshit Ming Liaodong cavalry? What Ming elites? Yang Qindong was going to fight the elites. He wanted to use this battle to let the enemy know the difference between the two sides. From now on, they would be honest and would not cause trouble for him. Therefore, even though the Black Knight Dragon Guard had already seen through the binoculars that many northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry were gathering nearby and were slowly encircling this place, he had no intention of sending a telegram for help. He wanted to first weaken the enemy's morale. For this battle, Yang Qindong took out a lot of light and heavy machine guns and ammunition from the warehouse. He wanted to give the Ming Liaodong cavalry a head-on blow. If the reinforcements appeared too early, Fong Dingshan would not have to pay such a huge price. Long Wei, get ready. If you feel that you can't hold on, this king will send a telegram to the 1st Cavalry Division, he said in a provocative tone. After these words, some of the black cavalry soldiers' faces turned red. The deputy commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ba Daojiang, was a straightforward person. He was also deeply trusted by Yang Qindong, so he did not have to worry too much about what he said. Therefore, he was the first to object. 6th young master, please go ahead. We don't need any reinforcements. We can still beat up these Ming Liaodong cavalry until they cry for their parents. With Ba Daojiang taking the lead, the others soon followed and shouted, Yes, we don't need reinforcements. We are the most powerful. Ha, good. Then this king will sit and watch your performance. This was exactly the result that Yang Qindong wanted. He chuckled and sat on a wooden chair that Beta Persei and the others had just made. He drank the brewed tea, crossed his legs, and leisurely closed his eyes while singing an unknown song. Yang Qindong was very optimistic about this battle, since he was prepared to use firearms against cold weapons. The existence of the Ming Liaodong cavalry was like a thorn in the Yangtze, becoming the biggest threat to Shi City. If he did not remove this thorn, he was afraid that he would be infected at any time and hurt his whole body. Yang Qindong
would never allow such a thing to happen. In order to completely solve this problem, he used a lot of firearms this time and even took the initiative to test it out. Even if he had no choice but to take the lives of some Han warriors, he had to do it. Fortunately, according to the intelligence department's understanding, the core component of the Ming Liaodong cavalry was not the Han people, but the Manchu and some Mongolian people. This made him not show any mercy when he attacked. As for whether it was dangerous for him to stand here, Yang Qindong had never thought about it. It was impossible to say that there was no danger at all. Even if there was a war, there would be deaths and injuries. However, it was unrealistic to say that it was very dangerous. After all, he had too many abilities to protect himself. Even if these 2,000 black cavalry could not hold on, he was not afraid. He had plenty of methods to deal with his opponent. Right now, it was just a matter of whether the other party had the ability to force him. At this moment, Yang Qindong, who had his eyes closed, thought of the big warehouse. He thought of the neat rows of war chariots, tanks, and even helicopters inside. This was his true trump card. Just based on this, even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he would not be able to enter. With the protection of the big warehouse, Yang Qindong had such confidence. Although he did not know what caused this, with such ability, he had to do something. The world was one, and the Han people were supreme. This became Yang Qindong's goal. Although it seemed that this goal was too grand and difficult to achieve, it was still a dream. However, Yang Qindong firmly believed that as long as he did it step by step, there would be a possibility of success. If he only thought about it every day and did nothing, not to mention that his life was just a short few decades, even if he was given thousands of years. So what? Thinking about this, Yang Qindong slowly fell asleep. There was a peaceful smile on his face, as if he had seen something in his dream that made him happy. Young master, the enemy is about to attack. Seeing Yang Qindong sleeping so soundly, Beta Persei did not want to disturb him. However, after considering that the battle would start soon and the sound of gunfire would not be small, if he did not wake up the young master, it would be a big crime if he really scared him. Oh, is it coming? Slowly opening his eyes, Yang Qindong first rubbed his eyelids, then slowly got up. Biming that the Liaodong cavalry would not attack him, Yang Qindong did not have any doubts about this matter. With such a piece of fat meat in front of him, there was no reason not to eat it. Although it was not appropriate to compare himself to a piece of fat meat, Yang Qindong knew very well that this was the case. After getting up, Yang Qindong took the binoculars from Beta Persei's hands and looked around. Sure enough, Qiyun Mountain was surrounded by Ming Liaodong cavalry. They were wearing the great Ming dynasty's Mandarin duck military uniform. Each of them held a saber in their hands and led their horses. They looked like they were ready to charge at any time. Quite a lot of them came. There was no trace of fear on his face. On the contrary, Yang Qindong seemed to smile with satisfaction. Then he strode towards the high platform in the tent that was built by Beta Persei and the others before, so that they could stand higher and see further to observe the enemy. Now, Yang Qindong walked up to the platform. Then he stood at the highest point of Qiyun Mountain in his golden battle robe. The appearance of the golden color instantly attracted everyone's attention. Young master, be careful. Seeing Yang Qindong walk to the highest point before the start of the battle, Beta Persei, who was afraid of danger, hurriedly shouted, Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, Ba Dao Jiang, Peng Yu, and the others behind him were also worried. It's okay. Yang Qindong casually waved his hand, telling Beta Persei and the others not to be excited. Then he said to Telecommunications Director Wang Shan, Bring me the loudspeaker. Wang Shan, who had been promoted to director, hurriedly handed over the iron loudspeaker that he had prepared long ago. Although this thing was a little rough, it could still play a certain role in amplifying the sound. He slowly raised the loudspeaker with his right hand and placed it near his mouth. Yang Qindong's voice also spread far and wide. Brothers of the Ming army, I am Yang Qindong, Bognam of Gojoseon, a king personally conferred by the emperor. But I don't know why you are here. Are you here on the emperor's orders? If not, isn't this no different from a rebellion? If that's the case, you'd better retreat quickly. This king is merciful and can forget all about your appearance here. But if you still don't obey, then don't blame this king for being ruthless. Later, the army will surround you. When that time comes, you won't have a chance to escape. You can decide for yourselves where to go. After shouting loudly, Yang Qindong put away the loudspeaker and returned to the wooden base from the high ground. Seeing that he was safe and sound, Beta Persei first breathed a sigh of relief, but then said with a bitter face, "Young master, I'm afraid it's useless to say this now." Looking at Beta Persei's expression, how could Yang Qindong not know that this person was simply afraid that his words would scare away the Baiming Liaodong cavalry? But he didn't point it out and nodded in agreement. Of course it's useless, and I don't expect it to be useful. I said this to tell Fang Dingshan that this king is here so that he can attack without worry. With this explanation, everyone was suddenly enlightened. Although Yang Qindong had shown himself before, only a few scouts had seen him. Even if it was reported to Fang Dingshan, he would only believe 70% of it. Only after witnessing it with his own eyes would he feel relieved. Otherwise, if the attack didn't go well, and he doubted whether Yang Qindong was really here, what would happen if he retreated? After Yang Qindong's appearance, things were different. After confirming the authenticity of Yang Qindong's appearance, Fang Dingshan would definitely not withdraw his troops unless there was really no hope left for him to make a great contribution. This was the reason why Yang Qindong had to show himself before the battle. This was tantamount to giving Fang Dingshan a reassurance. This king is right here. Come if you have the ability. After knowing Yang Qindong's intentions, Yang Er and the others laughed mischievously. With sufficient preparation, they were most worried that the enemy would run away. If that was the case, then wouldn't they have no place to display their skills? Now, they were even more confident. Each of them laughed heartily and waited for the enemy to charge in and kill them. Chapter 1335. As the Black Cavalry, they were awe-inspiring. However, as the Yang faction continued to grow, they gradually began to feel like heroes had no place to display their talents. Like today, there were not many opportunities to lead the enemy to encircle them. Everyone wanted to perform well, not to mention that they were so well prepared. Look, each person had a Type 95 gun. A squad had 2 light machine guns, a heavy machine gun. A platoon had a 100mm mortar and countless ammunition. With such weapons, how could they face any enemy? Not to mention 100,000. Even if there were 200,000 or 500,000, what could they do? At this time, the 2,000 Black Cavalry were all eager to fight. They had already taken off their black armor and were waiting for the enemy to attack. The war was about to begin. After Beta Persei got Yang Qindong's approval, he began to assign tasks. Considering that there were 3 slopes on Qian Mountain, 1 steep slope, and the area was not very large, Beta Persei divided the Black Cavalry into 2 groups. They were the first and second groups. He requested that when the battle started, the groups would fight one by one with a limit of 2 hours, and they would take turns to rest. And each group would take out 200 people, a total of 400 people as an emergency team. In case of an accident, there would be soldiers available. Even if they had the best weapons, the number of troops was also very important. Otherwise, if 2,000 people were to shoot randomly, even if they had good weapons, what could they do? In the end, people were still needed in a war. The black cavalry of Qian Mountain were making all kinds of preparations. General Fong Dingshan at the foot of the mountain was also flushed. If he had only heard about it before, then he had seen it with his own eyes. The person who shouted was Bugnam of Gojoseon, especially that voice. When he was an imperial bodyguard, he had seen Yang Qindong more than once and heard his voice. Even if it was confirmed that the person who was surrounded was Bugnam of Gojoseon and did not run away, Fong Dingshan firmly believed that his chance to make a great contribution had come. It was only 2,000 cavalrymen. Even if they could fight, how could they be a match for his army of 100,000? Even if it was a battle of attrition, he would exhaust these people to death. Not to mention, the Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's reputation as elites was not undeserved. Their combat strength was very strong, and they believed that there was no target that they could not take down. Pass down the order. Let's use 1,000 cavalry as a unit and charge. Other than the steep side, attack the other 3 sides with all your might. Don't be afraid of sacrificing yourself. Try to take down Mount Qi Yun in one go. If you can't do it, attack them one by one. I will exhaust them to death. Fong Dingshan shouted excitedly. He had no intention of underestimating the 2,000 black cavalry soldiers. He had also made many preparations so that he could react at any time. Considering the terrain of Mount Qiyun, sending too many people up would not be of much use. He decided to send 3,000 men to observe the situation first. If there was a chance, the whole army would attack. If it did not work, then he would look for a change. Fong Dingshan was clearly a qualified general. He was not arrogant at all. On the contrary, even when he attacked, he was very careful. When he came up, he would try to probe the enemy. He could be considered an excellent general. With a command, 3,000 Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry from 3 directions moved out. Under the beating of the war drums, they spurred their horses forward. 3,000 cavalrymen came from afar in a fan-shaped formation. The cavalrymen were constantly making all kinds of evasive maneuvers. Sometimes they were on top of their horses, sometimes they were below their horses, and sometimes they were close to their horses. Their superb horsemanship was displayed incisively and vividly. They're finally here. On Mount Qiyun, Beta Persei rubbed his hands excitedly. His eyes never left the battlefield for a moment. When he saw that the distance between the 2 sides was less than 800 meters, he stretched out his hands and placed them on the butt of a heavy machine gun. Soldiers of the 1st Brigade, pay attention. Don't be impulsive. Wait until the enemy is 300 meters away. This time, we won't let them go back. 300 meters was only 10 breaths of time for the charging cavalry. It was dangerous to launch a counterattack at this time. However, after seeing the excellent weapons of the Black Knights and Dragon Guards, everyone felt that it was only right and proper. Moreover, everyone was full of confidence. On the Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's side, Fong Dingshan walked out of the main tent and looked over. He also wanted to see how Yang Qindong was going to get out of the encirclement. Just now, the scout had reported that there were no reinforcements from the 5-star army within 100 miles. In other words, the 2,000 black cavalry were still alone. This made Fong Dingshan overjoyed. With this, he was even more confident that he could kill Bugnam of Gojoseon here. His gaze followed the cavalry's charge. When he saw that they were less than a mile away from the 5-star army's camp, Fong Dingshan was so nervous that his throat almost jumped out of his throat. At this moment, he was full of confidence. He believed that, at such a distance, the cavalry was the absolute ruler of the battlefield. The black cavalry had no room to struggle. He was even prepared to order the entire army to charge. Although he only brought 40,000 Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry because of time constraints, he was confident that it would not be a problem to take care of 2,000 enemy cavalry. 500 meters, 400 meters, 350 meters at this distance. Those with good eyesight could even see the faces of the beaming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. They could also see that they were holding onto their bows and ready to shoot at any time. Some of the black cavalry also reflexively began to sweat. Attack! Just when some of the black cavalry were so nervous that they could not help but fire, the temporary commander, Beta Persei, shouted. Then, the heavy machine gun in his hand was the first to fire. Bullets swept forward like beans. The 5 beaming Liaodong Iron Cavalry in this area were like grass that was crushed by a boulder. They instantly fell to the ground together with their horses. Attack! The captain of the 1st Brigade, Chiu Vi, and the vice-captain, Badao Jiang, shouted at the same time. Then, the light and light guns and the Type 95 continuous fire and burst fire sounded together. The battlefield was instantly surrounded by all kinds of bullets. One by one, the hot bullet shells kept jumping on the ground. Following that, one by one, the beaming Liaodong Iron Cavalry fell to the ground. As the ancients said, shoot the horse before shooting the man. But in the eyes of the black cavalry, who had good marksmanship, they preferred to shoot people. It gave them a greater sense of achievement. This also showed the strength of the black cavalry. They had all undergone high-intensity shooting training, who knew how many bullets they were fed, but their marksmanship was not bad. This time, they finally had a chance to show off. Bullets rained down. One after another, the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry fell on the path of the charge. It was a pity that their exquisite horsemanship and impressive martial arts did not even have a chance to display them at this moment. Bullets flew everywhere. In just a quarter of an hour, the 3,000 black cavalry were completely annihilated. Fong Dingshan did not give the order to retreat. Not a single one of the beaming Liaodong Iron Cavalry retreated. It could be seen that their military discipline was very strict. Hiss! Fong Dingshan, in the middle of the army, felt a pain in his teeth. These were 3,000 black cavalry. Just like that, they died on the charge. Not a single one of them even had the chance to swing their weapons. This loss made him feel a toothache, a headache, and pain all over his body. General, what do we do? They actually have firearms. UG General Mu Qiong also had a pained expression as he asked Fong Dingshan. The black cavalry actually had firearms. This was indeed out of Fong Dingshan's expectations. However, it was absolutely impossible for them to retreat just like that. It was not easy to get a chance to surround Yang Qindong. He would not give it up so easily. Facing his subordinate's question, Fong Dingshan pretended to be indifferent and said, "Isn't it just firearms? We beaming Iron Cavalry have them too. We've seen them before. No matter how powerful they are, they still need to use gunpowder. After all, they only have 200 men. I want to see what they will do once they run out of gunpowder. Come, let's order 3,000 more. No, 6,000 black cavalry. Charge!" Fong Dingshan did not believe in heresy. After giving this order, he turned to a scout and said, "Immediately send a message to General Luo Baikuan. Tell him to come over here. This time, even if we have to use numbers, we must keep Bugnam of Gojoseon here." Just like that, Yang Qindong's first goal was achieved. That was to rescue the heavy cavalry wind chaser unit that was surrounded. With himself as the target, he successfully attracted over 100,000 beaming Liaodong Iron Cavalry to rush over. On Qian Mountain, after the first wave of enemies was completely wiped out, there was a burst of cheers from above. Every soldier of the Black Cavalry's 1st Battalion was filled with excitement and excitement. Just now, they had fought to their heart's content. Only now did they know that compared to fighting on horseback, killing with guns was much more satisfying and clean. The 1st Battalion had a good time, while the 2nd Battalion's members were filled with envy and jealousy. The 2nd Battalion's commander, Dao Xiao, purposely approached the temporary commander Beta Persei and said, "Second brother, do you think it's our turn now?" "Oh, it's not time yet, but you can discuss it with Captain Chiu. As long as he agrees, I don't mind." Beta Persei was in a good mood and naturally would not reject Dao Xiao's desire to kill the enemy. He looked at the military watch on his wrist and said casually, Okay. Dao Xiao immediately nodded in agreement and walked to Chiu V's side. Before he spoke, he smiled and said, "Captain Chiu, Brother Chiu, don't say anything. A battalion takes an hour. We've only used less than half of that time. You guys wait a little longer." Chiu V was having a good time. How could he agree to a change of guard so easily? This was such a good opportunity. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was a once-in-a-decade opportunity. Moreover, even if he agreed, the brothers below him would most likely not agree. Unfortunately, in front of the 400 reserve members who were already prepared, they didn't even have the chance to jump up and swing their swords before they were killed by the flying bullets. War horses could be bought. These were all healthy horses, and Ming had spent a lot of money to get them. However, he couldn't take these soldiers. There were only 2,000 black cavalry soldiers on the mountain. If there were too many prisoners, it would be hard to avoid unexpected dangers. Yang Qindong was here, so he couldn't be careless about safety. They wouldn't lose the big picture for the small. A total of more than 1,000 high-quality war horses were captured. At this time, they were all placed in a corner of the mountain. There was already a horse stump there. It was obvious that they were prepared. Another 6,000 black cavalry soldiers were completely wiped out. Fang Dingshan's expression became extremely ugly when he saw this. In less than an hour, they had already lost 9,000 black cavalry soldiers. Fang Dingshan's heart ached. He had spent a lot of effort to train every single one of these black cavalry soldiers. On the battlefield, he felt that it was not worth it even if they were replaced by 2 or 3 5-star army soldiers. But now, 9,000 black cavalry soldiers rushed out and didn't even hurt a single hair on the enemy's head. This was very difficult for him to accept. The other generals stood in the big tent at this moment, not knowing what to do. If someone had told them before today that 2,000 enemies would be enough to render them helpless, they would probably have laughed out loud. But when the truth really happened, they realized that nothing was impossible. What was worse was that they didn't know what to do. Retreating was impossible. It wasn't easy to catch Bugnam of Gojoseon, and the scouts would report the surrounding situation every hour. Until now, there were no signs of other 5-star army reinforcements. How could they give up such a rare opportunity? If they couldn't retreat, then they could only charge. But how could they charge to reduce their losses and achieve their goal? Although it was called a siege, there were many ways to do so. For example, the most commonly used method was to surround the enemy without fighting. They would wait for the enemy to run out of food and water. Then they would surround the enemy and block the enemy. But the problem was that Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was surrounded, wouldn't give them too much time. Who knew how many 5-star army soldiers had already received the news and were rushing here? Just the word wait was enough to make them fall into a disadvantage. Continue to attack. I want to see how much gunpowder they have. Mu Qiong, you take command. Only send out 500 cavalrymen at a time. Spread out and waste the enemy's gunpowder. Fang Dingshan was naturally unwilling to give up such a good opportunity. After thinking for a while, he made this decision. General is wise. After hearing Fang Dingshan's decision, The other generals cupped their fists and looked as if it was only natural. No matter what, a small-scale attack would reduce the risk of their lives. In their hearts, they also wanted to see how much gunpowder this 2,000 five-star army had. Once the enemy ran out of gunpowder, it would be time for them to charge forward and seize victory. Mu Qiong accepted the order and sent out the first 500 cavalrymen. These 500 cavalrymen split into 3 different directions and charged towards the peak of Chiyun Mountain. The formation was very scattered, and this was the best way to distract the enemy's gunpowder. At the peak of the mountain, 2 hours had passed. It was finally the second team's turn to fight. However, what was depressing was that after 15 minutes, the Ming Liaodong cavalrymen still did not make any moves. This made Captain Dao Xiao unable to hold it in any longer and cursed out loud. "What's going on? Did they admit defeat? I say, if you have the guts, come at me. I'll be waiting for you here." Perhaps it was because of his cursing. Not far away, they could finally see the figures of the Ming Liaodong cavalrymen. However, compared to the previous 2 attacks, there were much fewer of them. With the mindset that a few pieces were still meat, Dao Zhao's second team soldiers were still in high spirits. "Everyone, follow your positions and focus on your targets. Don't waste bullets. Try to hit them with 1 shot." Dao Xiao was smart. He did not have as many enemies as the first team, so in terms of killing, he could not compare. Since that was the case, then he would compete with his marksmanship. If he could kill an opponent with 1 shot, then even if there were fewer enemies, he would still be able to shine. 800 muskets against 500 enemies. Before the battle even started, the result was already decided. In just 2 rounds of shooting, many of the soldiers did not even fire a single shot, and the 500 cavalrymen were all sent to meet the King of Hell. Yang Qindong had already arrived at the front of the formation. He had clearly seen what had just happened, and his heart was filled with emotions. If he had not personally been on the battlefield, he would not have thought that victory would be so simple. When the 8-Nation Alliance first entered Beijing, there were only 10,000 of them. However, they were able to beat up the Qing dynasty's army, which seemed to have a lot of resources, to the point where they could not even tell which way was north. That was because they had been constantly attacking. They were not as well prepared and well equipped as he was. The advantage of firearms against cold weapons was simply too great. On the Ming Liaodong cavalryman's side, another 500 cavalrymen died. If one looked closely, they did not even make a splash on the battlefield. Mu Qiong's expression became very ugly. He really wanted to ask General Fang Dingshan to tell him that the battle could not continue like this, but he did not dare to. Before he received any new orders, he could only continue to charge. He only hoped that these people would waste the 5-star army's gunpowder and prepare for the final charge. Just like that, every hour or so, the Ming Liaodong cavalrymen would charge. The number of people charging varied. Sometimes there were 500 of them, while other times there were only 200 to 300 of them. They were using their lives to fight the Black Cavalry's gunpowder consumption. However, wasn't this giving the Black Cavalry a chance to practice target shooting? This was a real enemy, and such a chance to practice target shooting was rare. Every soldier took the opportunity to ensure that they did not fire. If they did, they would be able to take the enemy's life. The sky quickly darkened, but the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's attack did not stop. They already knew that there were only 2,000 Black Cavalry Dragon Guards in the mountains, so they thought that even if they had to waste time, they would exhaust the enemy's strength. In this regard, Beta Persei asked for instructions from Yang Qindong, and as expected, he took measures to deal with it. A team of 200 people was the norm, and the rest were all to rest. In this way, the problem was easily solved. Not long after, all kinds of snoring and grinding sounds came from the mountains. compared to the black cavalry sleeping soundly, Fong Dingshan was not in the mood to sleep at all. He walked out of the main tent and looked at Qi Yinshan, who was several miles away. His eyes flashed with an indescribable anger. "Just you wait. When my reinforcements arrive tomorrow, we will launch a charge all over the mountains and plains. At that time, I don't believe that you will still have 1,000 hands and feet. Let's see who will be the final victor." Fong Dingshan was already angry. He swore that he would take revenge. For this, he would rather fill in the 100,000 lives here. As long as he could kill Yang Qindong, everything would be worth it. Without a leader, the 5-star army would not be a threat to Ming. Chapter 1337. At the same time, Yang Qindong, who was on Qian Mountain, had also woken up. When he saw that Wang Shan had also fallen asleep on his bed, he did not disturb him. Instead, he sat in front of the telegraph machine and began to report to the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division, the new 101st Army, and the divisions directly under them. Looking at the situation on the battlefield today, his safety was naturally not a problem. Even so, what he needed to do now was not for these people to come and help him. Instead, he needed them to set up an inescapable net outside the battlefield. When the Ming Liaodong cavalry was defeated and retreated, they would surround and eliminate the enemy. Yang Qindong wanted to use this battle to get rid of the malignant tumor of the Ming Liaodong cavalry. He wanted to use this battle to shut the mouths of the Ming people and slap their faces. He wanted to make them uncontrollably afraid and fearful when they thought of him. Whether it was waiting or anticipating, the sky finally brightened. Both sides seemed to have formed some kind of tacit agreement. They stopped fighting and started to make breakfast. For a moment, smoke rose in spirals and floated in the sky above and below the mountain. Fong Dingshan quickly finished his breakfast. Mu Qiong walked into the main tent with a blood-red face. He did not sleep last night as he continuously planned all kinds of attacks. Unfortunately, there was almost no effect. He did not even know if this kind of attack affected the sleep of the black cavalry. Seeing Mu Qiong walk in, Fong Dingshan sat up straight and asked with a trace of expectation, "How is it?" He already knew that the result would not be good. Otherwise, he would not have sent people to find Mu Qiong. Mu Qiong would have taken the initiative to come. This subordinate is guilty. Mu Qiong did not say anything else and knelt on the ground. Although it was Fong Dingshan who gave the order to continuously attack, Fong Dingshan was a superior. He was the one who carried out the order. If there was a problem, he would have to take responsibility. Fortunately, although Fong Dingshan was greedy for power, he was
We don't
not
have a chance to rush
unreasonable
up.
person.
Mu Qiong
All right,
lowered his
stand up
head
and speak,
and said
This
nervously,
general gave the order.
although Fong
No matter
Dingshan
what the
had
result
expected
is,
this outcome,
I will not
he
blame
still
you.
sighed in disappointment
Thank
when
you,
he heard it.
General.
Is
Mu
Qiong's
Qiong's face
mountain
finally
really
looked better,
so
and he
heavily
spoke
guarded?
more clearly.
Yes, they have
General,
something that can
after
light
the
up
sky
everything.
turned dark yesterday,
Once we charge,
I
this thing will
continuously
appear,
ordered my
and
men to
all of our
charge.
cavalrymen
There were
will
a
be
total of
exposed.
13 times.
They won't even have
and
time
nearly
to react
3,000
before they are
cavalrymen
shot
were
dead
killed
by firearms
due to the cover of the night.
Mu Qiong was
Only
amazed
7
by
of
the
them managed
advanced
to
weaponry
escape,
of the black
and 5 of them
cavalry
were injured.
as he spoke with
Fong
lingering
Dingshan's
fear.
face darkened.
He would never
when
forget
he heard that they
once
had
the
lost
thing
so
that could
much
light up
in one
everything
night.
appeared.
However,
It would be
he
as
still
bright as
asked
day on the top of the
expectantly,
mountain.
Did
And
anyone
no one
manage
manage
to
to
get
get
to the top of the mountain?
If that's
Do you
the
know
case,
how much
we
gunpowder
can't
they
even
have
attack
left?
at night.
This-
Fong Dingshan
No,
was shocked to hear
the defenses
that
on the
such an
mountain
advanced
are
weapon had
tight.
appeared. He had completely given up on the idea of attacking at night. Yes, once that thing appears, the cavalrymen will be unprepared and will not be able to adapt to it. Especially the war horses, they will neigh uncontrollably and will not be able to charge at full speed. Mu Qiong wanted to continue exaggerating the power of the weapon, but Fong Dingshan interrupted him. All right, I got it. Yes, Hen,
Go and rest. General, aren't we going to attack later? Mu Qiong was naturally happy to hear that he could rest, but he was also worried that he would be woken up before he could fall asleep. So he asked, Wait, General Luo will be here soon. Once he arrives, we will launch a big attack. No matter what, this time we must take down Qian Mountain and take Bugnam of Gojoseon's head. Fang Dingshan was almost furious as he spoke. If one listened carefully, one could hear the sound of teeth gnashing. The battlefield suddenly quieted down. This made Xiuvi and Dao Xiao unhappy. After resting for a night, they thought that the battle would continue, and they would be able to kill to their heart's content. However, Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry was terrified. This was really disappointing. Don't worry, it's just the darkness before dawn. Perhaps the big attack will begin soon. Yang Qindong's face was calm, but his words were full of murderous intent. He didn't believe that Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry would give up the chance to kill him. They weren't attacking now, but they were just waiting. The more they acted like this, the more it meant that the scale of the next attack would be huge. In the eyes of the Black Cavalry, Yang Qindong was like a god. Since he said so, no one doubted him. Knowing that a big battle was imminent, all the soldiers began to clean their guns and reload, preparing for the battle that could erupt at any time. Soon it was noon. Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry still didn't move, but there were rumbling sounds of horses galloping on the ground not far away. As dust rose into the air, Deputy General Luo Baiquan finally brought the rest of the Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry over. A total of 85,000 Bai Ming's Liaodong cavalry gathered together. Looking down from the mountain, it was a black mass. It was a spectacular sight. Are they finally here? Yang Qindong took the binoculars and looked down the mountain. After seeing everything clearly, a cold smile appeared on his face. He had a feeling that the enemy's charge would begin soon. At this moment, he couldn't help but sigh at how difficult Fang Dingshan was to deal with. Imagine if they attacked in the afternoon, there was no need to talk about using it. But if they failed, they could use the night to retreat. That way, even if there was an ambush outside, it would be extremely difficult to catch them all. Before planning for victory, one had to think about defeat. This was a quality that a good general had to have. Come on, adjust the muzzles. Once the enemy attacks, immediately launch a blanket attack on the enemy camp. This time, we need to kill as many of the enemy's forces as possible so that they won't be able to pose any threat for a while. Yang Qindong said, as if he was preparing for a rainy day. If the enemy wanted to do something ruthless, why wouldn't he do the same? At that moment, the 30 100mm mortars on the mountain were fully prepared. Other than that, a few flamethrowers and grenades were also taken out. The light and heavy machine guns were loaded with ammunition to ensure that once they opened fire, they would be able to continuously kill the enemy. Send a telegram to the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Division of the New Army, and the subordinate division to prepare to face the scattered enemy. Yang Qindong didn't forget about the cavalry army outside. This was enough to prove his confidence in the Black Cavalry. At the foot of the mountain, Luo Baiquan walked into the main tent in full armor and came in front of Fang Dingshan. Once he entered the tent, Luo Baiquan said anxiously, "General, is Bugnam of Gojoseon sure that he's on the mountain?" "Yes." Fang Dingshan nodded and answered with a very confident tone. Hearing this answer, Luo Baiquan smiled. He gave up the opportunity to completely annihilate the heavy cavalry regiment to come here. If Bugnam of Gojoseon wasn't on the mountain, and there were only 2,000 black cavalry soldiers, he wouldn't be interested. But now it was different. If he could kill Yang Qindong, it would definitely be a great achievement. No matter how many heavy cavalry regiments he annihilated, it would still be incomparable. General, when are we going to attack? Luo Baikuan didn't know the power of the firearms in the black cavalry soldiers' hands. At this moment, he was a little anxious. Perhaps he didn't even put the black cavalry in his eyes. After all, there were only 2,000 people. No matter how powerful they were, it was only 2,000 people against almost 100,000 elite Ming Liaodong heavy cavalry. What could they do? Seeing Luo Baikuan's confidence, Fang Dingshan wanted to come to the same conclusion. But when he thought of the big loss he suffered yesterday, he had to be realistic. They have firearms. Don't underestimate them. Firearms? When Luo Baikuan heard this, he still said disapprovingly, I've seen firearms before. Just like the 20,000 firearms camp that Gao Yu brought, it's just SOSO. We can take it down with one charge. There are only 2,000 enemies here. What can they do? We have the advantage in numbers. Victory is not a problem at all. Luo Baikuan's confident words were heard by Fang Dingshan, and he was very encouraged. Yes, we have the advantage in numbers. Even if the enemy's firearms are powerful, they can't kill us all. As long as we can rush to the top of the mountain, victory will be ours. Fang Dingshan, who had received encouragement, was grinning from ear to ear. Then he called in the generals to make arrangements for the battle. At this moment, he seemed to be able to see the scene of Yang Qindong's head being chopped off and presented to the Daizong Emperor. Looking down from the bottom of the mountain, he could see the Ming Liaodong heavy cavalry gathering their troops. Seeing more and more enemies getting on their horses, Yang Qindong put down his binoculars after he pulled out his sabers. Prepare to load the ammunition. Fire the cannons. Ming Liaodong heavy cavalry was ready to charge. Yang Qindong couldn't just let them do as they pleased. After all, the difference in numbers was too great. If he really waited for the enemy to charge in front of him before he opened fire, with the cavalry's speed, the enemy would reach him in 300 meters. If that was the case, he would be in danger. He couldn't just sit there and wait for death. He had to strike first. He believed that since the enemy decided to charge, they wouldn't stop just because he made the first move. Their sabers were not stained with blood, and their strength had not been fully displayed. They were already dead. That kind of feeling made his heart ache and palpitate. What kind of brain did Bugnam of Gojoseon have to create so many powerful firearms? Just what kind of person was Wu Nen Wang to be able to create such a battle formation with the few against the many? What kind of courage did Bugnam of Gojoseon have to face 100,000 with 2,000 men and not be afraid? Instead, he was filled with killing intent. At this moment, Fong Dingshan hated Yang Qindong to the core. If cursing could kill someone, then even 1,000 lives would not be enough for Bugnam of Gojoseon. His eyes were red, his heart was bleeding, and blood was flowing out of the corner of his mouth because of the heartache. Gradually, Fong Dingshan, who was always calm and composed and never moved in the slightest, became more and more unsightly. His mental endurance had reached its limit, and he was about to collapse. "General, should we retreat?" Mu Qiong was standing guard beside Fong Dingshan. He watched as countless cavalrymen charged forward, but soon there was no news of them. The lively young lad had turned into a corpse that could not move at all. How could his heart not bleed? Before he knew how much gunpowder Bugnam of Gojoseon had prepared, he thought that such a reckless charge would not solve anything, so he thought of persuading them to stop. Fong Dingshan's face showed a hint of hesitation and struggle, but he quickly shook his head. "No, we can't stop." Indeed, they could not stop. If this could not take down Yang Qindong, Fong Dingshan did not know when he would have the chance to kill this person. As long as Yang Qindong did not die, Ming would be in danger, and it was not impossible for the country to be destroyed. Therefore, no matter how high the price he had to pay, Fong Dingshan could not retreat, and he could not hesitate. He wanted to pay with lives today. He wanted to see how long the 5-star army could last. Did they not know how tiring it was to kill people? Ming's Liaodong cavalry did not show any signs of stopping, and the gunshots on Qian Mountain did not stop either. However, if one listened carefully, the gunshots were not as intense as before. Chapter 1339. On the top of the mountain, the heavy machine guns had already become scalding hot due to overheating. Some light machine guns also had the same problem. Fortunately, there was enough water on the mountain. At this moment, buckets of water were poured under the guns, igniting a large amount of steam. Stop the light and light machine guns appropriately, and use them after cooling down. All the people who have retreated go get grenades and blow up these enemies. Yang Qindong's voice replaced Beta Persei's. In a war that had never been organized with such intensity, Beta Persei's commanding ability obviously still needed to be improved. Fortunately, Yang Qindong in his previous life had seen all kinds of storms and waves, so he quickly replaced the commanding position. Under his command, the 2,000 black cavalry did their own things in an orderly manner and dealt a heavy blow to the enemy. Beta Persei was still learning seriously from the side. However, he didn't know if there would be another chance to command like this. After all, not every enemy was as brave, fearless, and disciplined as Ming's Liaodong cavalry. Countless grenades were thrown down the mountain. After a series of explosions and smoke, another batch of Ming's Liaodong cavalry fell on the charging road. Yang Qindong took this opportunity to wipe the sweat on his forehead. At this moment, he had to admit that Ming's Liaodong cavalry's bravery was beyond his expectations. If it wasn't for his ample preparation, he was afraid that the enemy might have really rushed up. If that was the case, with only the 2,000 black cavalry, he could only rely on Datsang to rush out. That was his trump card, and he wouldn't use it easily. Otherwise, some things wouldn't be easy to explain. The bravery of Ming's Liaodong cavalry was beyond Yang Qindong's expectations, but how could it not be a happy thing? The fiercer the other party charged now, the greater the losses would be, and the less of a threat they might pose to him in the future. It was even possible to wipe them all out here. That way, the threat of Ming would be greatly reduced, and the entire 5-star army would be able to spare more energy and manpower to do what they wanted to do. The sound of gunfire was still going on. For hours later, the sky outside was completely dark. The only thing that could be seen on the battlefield was the muzzle flashes that constantly spewed out bullets, as well as the flares that were fired into the air from time to time. Every time the flare lit up, Gunshots would ring out. Groups of northern Ming kingdom's Liaodong iron cavalry would fall down like sand blown by the wind. This scene was clearly seen by everyone under the illumination of the flares. As more and more of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry became corpses, the morale of the army began to waver. No one in the world was willing to die. As long as there was a bit of hope to live, they wouldn't take the initiative to seek death. The previous attack was completely due to the strict discipline of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry, and the fact that the target was only 2,000 people, which gave countless people hope. But now, seeing that the five-star army's gunfire didn't seem to stop, and even the heavy and light machine guns that had stopped firing were starting to ring out again, some of the soldiers who thought that the five-star army didn't have enough gunpowder finally began to feel disappointed. There was no chance of victory at all, and they were only using human lives to fill the gap. When would this kind of battle end? If the 80,000 cavalry were all here, but the other parties still had gunpowder, what would they do? Wouldn't that mean that everyone had died here for nothing? Everyone had their own selfish motives, especially on a battlefield where there was no chance of victory. Some people couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. The first to make a move were the Mongolian grassland men that Fong Dingshan had spent a lot of money to invite from the merchants. They were like mercenaries, and they came here for money. As long as someone paid them, they would give their lives. Even if they died in battle, they wouldn't regret it. But even if they knew that they would die, they still wanted to charge. That wasn't something a greedy person would do. Even if they had money, they had to be alive to spend it. When they saw that the five-star army was still full of firepower, these people were shaken. Then, some self-proclaimed smart people began to flee under the cover of the night when no one was watching them. When the first person retreated, the people around him quickly followed suit. Soon, more and more cavalrymen began to disregard the military order and retreat. Their retreat was like a domino effect, causing more and more cavalrymen to retreat. Humans were social animals. What they would do the most was follow suit. When they saw that the people around them had begun to retreat, it was their nature to retreat as well. As for the so-called consequences, that was a matter for the future. As a result, on the battlefield, in the dark, more and more Baiming Liaodong cavalry started to retreat. It was like a plague that spread to everyone. Many cavalry, who didn't know what was going on, thought that it was an order from the general and also retreated. Luo Baikuan, who was hiding under the cover of the trees, quickly realized that something was wrong. He knew that the thing he was most worried about had happened. In order to obtain the final victory, there was no time for him to think. He rushed out from his hiding place and shouted, "Everyone, listen to my order! Continue to charge! Charge! Those who retreat will die." After shouting this, Luo Baikuan rode his warhorse into the battlefield and slashed at the head of a Mongolian soldier who was retreating. Swoosh! With one slash, a head rolled to the ground. At this time, Luo Baikuan was like a killing god. He ignored the blood splattered on his body as he shouted loudly, "This general is here. Those who retreat will be killed." Luo Baikuan used his actions to show everyone what battlefield discipline was. This action also frightened many of the surrounding cavalrymen. The soldiers who originally wanted to retreat had no choice but to stop what they were doing. Phew! Seeing that the army had temporarily stabilized, Luo Baikuan let out a sigh of relief. In order to increase the victory, he shouted, "They only have 2,000 people. They can't have so much gunpowder. As long as we persevere, victory will be ours." He was still cheering his subordinates on, encouraging them to continue to charge. It could also be said that he was encouraging them to die. Suddenly, a flare lit up in the sky and lit up the mountainside like it was daytime. With the help of the flare, the black cavalry at the top of the mountain saw everything. When they saw a small number of Ming Liaodong cavalrymen, Ba Daojiang, who was in charge of artillery support, laughed. "Come on, charge to the mountainside, and open fire." When the flare lit up, Luo Baiquan, who was riding on his horse, had a bad feeling. However, he didn't retreat immediately because he knew that many soldiers were looking at him. If he were to hide like this, the morale of the army would definitely be greatly affected. He was afraid that the army would really be routed. With a fluke mentality, Luo Baiquan continued to shout to the soldiers gathered around him, "There is no one in this world that can't be killed. We have a strong advantage in numbers. As long as everyone works together, victory will definitely belong to us. As long as we can kill Bugnam of Gojoseon, we will all be heroes. The great Ming dynasty will remember us, and we will be conferred the title of Marquis." Chirp, boom. Just as Luo Baiquan was encouraging the morale of the army, suddenly dozens of cannonballs fell from the sky and covered their area. Coincidentally, one of the cannonballs landed 3 meters away from Luo Baiquan. Following a loud bang, an indescribable wave of air enveloped Luo Baiquan. Luo Baiquan, who was still thinking of saying something on his warhorse, felt his chest tighten. Then he was separated from his warhorse and flew into the air. Luo Baiquan, who was flying in the air, still had his mouth open. However, because his internal organs were severely injured, he could no longer utter a single word. As he opened and closed his mouth, streams of dark red blood flowed out. Luo Baiquan was actually blown away. One could imagine that the Ming Liaodong cavalrymen, who had recovered some of their morale, could not take it anymore. Their general was dead, so why were they still guarding here? Even if they were to charge, who would they charge for? Run! No one knew who shouted so loudly, but the Ming Liaodong cavalrymen began to collapse. This move quickly became a trend that no one could stop. Fang Dingshan, who was waiting for the news of victory, suddenly saw countless black figures retreating from the foot of the mountain. His eyes could not help but widen. He knew that the result he was most afraid of had happened. Before this, Fang Dingshan had already made up his mind. As long as the soldiers did not retreat, he would not retreat. Even if he had to sacrifice all of the Ming Liaodong cavalrymen, as long as he could kill Yang Chendong, everything would be worth it. But now, the army suddenly retreated. He did not give such a military order, so there was only one result. The army's morale and momentum were gone. This was the only result. It's over, it's over. Tears fell from the corner of Fang Dingshan's eyes. He knew that the situation was over. At this time, even if he stood out and wanted to boost the army's morale, it was obviously impossible. Dispersing was dispersing. It was not something that anyone could gather in a short period of time. Fang Dingshan, who said that it was over, did not manage to catch his breath and immediately fainted. If Mu Qiong hadn't reacted quickly enough and caught him, he would have been seriously injured from the fall. Mu Qiong did not understand why the general suddenly fainted. Just as he was panicking, a fast horse came in front of him, reporting, "General Luo Baiquan has died in battle. The army has begun to retreat." Chapter 1340. What? This bad news finally made Mu Qiong understand what had happened. He sighed at how fast the general's reaction was, and his expression changed. The army had retreated. Didn't that mean that they had lost the battle? Since they had lost, they had to fight the way they lost. Thinking of this, he immediately said, "Even so, we can't just sit here and wait for death. All troops retreat and find a safe place to wait for the general to wake up. Retreat." Without Fang Dingshan and Luo Baiquan, Mu Qiong's orders were naturally the most important. Under the command of this general who had long wanted to retreat, the army could finally retreat openly.
The Ming Liaodong cavalry, who had received the military order and were prepared to risk their lives to charge, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Then, none of them charged up the mountain. They turned around and fled in all directions without any pattern. On the peak of Qian Mountain, the exhausted black cavalry was still waiting for the Ming Liaodong cavalry to charge. But all of a sudden, the battlefield quieted down, which made everyone feel that it was unreal. For the past few hours, the enemy's war horses had been charging. Shouts and screams shook the sky. Under the sound of guns and cannons, many people's ears were buzzing. They were not used to the sudden silence. However, when Yang Qindong heard that there was no sound of horses charging, his whole body shook. After taking a look through the binoculars, he became even more determined. He said, "The Ming Liaodong cavalry can't win and want to escape." "Ha! Men, fire the cannons. Even if they want to escape, we have to skin them alive." Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Under Yang Qindong's order, the cannons rumbled. Who knew how many of the Ming Liaodong cavalry who were fleeing were hit by the cannons and died tragically on the ground? Soon, there was a roar of excitement on Qian Mountain. "We won! We won!" Yang Er shouted. At the same time, he jumped up and down nonstop. The other commanders and soldiers were also cheering loudly, celebrating the moment of victory. Even if they had the most advanced firearms in their hands, no one could guarantee that they would win against nearly 100,000 cavalry with only 2,000 soldiers. Only they themselves would know if there were people who were worried or on edge during the process. And now, they had finally obtained the final victory. At this moment, everyone was extremely excited. At the same time, they looked at Yang Qindong with admiration. This was their king. He fought against 100,000 with 2,000 soldiers and forced the enemy to retreat. Although there were many people in history who won against the enemy, only their king could achieve such a glorious result. They were proud to be part of their king's side. How many people did we kill? Among the cheers, it was unknown who had suddenly said such a sentence, but it instantly attracted everyone's attention. 30,000? I think it's more than that. Our first platoon killed nearly 20,000 people. Chiu Vi shook his head. Obviously, he was dissatisfied with the number of soldiers. That's right. I think there were at least 40,000 people. Our second platoon also killed nearly 20,000 people. Dao Xiao also jumped out, although he did not have to worry about the military merit because he was with Yang Qindong. He still had to fight for it. Are you kidding me? Did our artillery team not do anything? We killed at least 10,000 people. Ba Daojiang also stood out. He would never allow anyone to take away his achievement, not even the two platoon leaders. For a moment, there was a heated discussion about how many people they had killed. Yang Qindong did not participate. Because of the firearms and the dark sky, he did not know how many people they had killed. However, he believed that he would get the results soon, because outside of Qian Mountain, the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Division of the new First Army, and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new Second Army were all in place. As long as they stopped the Ming Liaodong cavalry, they would be able to get a rough idea of how many people they had lost. Yes, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new Second Army had also arrived outside of Qian Mountain. They were led by the commander of the Mercenary Division. His original mission was to guard Tulu City with 2 divisions to prevent the 50,000 Ming army inside the city from converging with the 80,000 Ming army outside the city. However, as the commander of the mercenary division that Yang Qindong had entrusted with such an important task, he was not a passive person. When he arrived on the battlefield, he quickly displayed his skills.
He sent people to disguise themselves as the Ming army to open the city gates and force their way into Tulu City. The sudden arrival of the two divisions of cavalry caused the 50,000 Ming army to panic. Most of them were new soldiers who had never been on the battlefield. Although they had undergone some training, they had never seen real combat. They had never even seen blood. How could they be a match for the elite new 2nd Army Cavalry? In just a little more than 4 hours, Tulu City had become the territory of the new 2nd Army. She had once come from this place, so she was naturally very familiar with every blade of grass and tree here. Soon, she issued a series of correct orders. Not only did she take complete control of Tulu City, she also seized a large amount of food and 45,000 captives. After the great victory in Tulu City, Mercenary Division received news that Yang Qindong had used himself as bait to lure the Ming Liaodong cavalry into Chiyun Mountain. He immediately handed over the task of defending the city to the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Li Jun. The 5-star army, who had always worshipped Yang Qindong's words, naturally acted according to the order, and the encirclement by the company was launched. The orders were given without any hesitation. However, not everyone had their own thoughts. For example, the heavy cavalry regiment commander Zhuai Feng, who was hiding in a valley with the company, was currently waiting for a battle. His heart was beating like a drum. He was very clear about the strength of the Ming Liaodong cavalry. Even his heavy cavalry regiment was not a match for them. He also heard that the 6th young master only had 2,000 black cavalry. Could they really face 100,000 Ming Liaodong cavalry and not be defeated? If this was said by someone else, Zhuai Feng would naturally not believe it. He would even accuse the other party of false military intelligence and punish them. However, this came from the 6th young master, so he did not dare to say anything. All this time, no one knew how many miracles Yang Qindong had created. It was to the point that everyone was used to him doing some shocking things and would not suspect anything. Zhuai Feng was still thinking about the reliability of this matter. If it was true, how did the 6th young master do it? While this question was still flashing in his mind, the company commander suddenly said, "Commander Zhuai Feng, there is a situation." Oh, Zhuai Feng immediately put away his chaotic thoughts. He held the binoculars in his hand and looked up. He saw no less than 700 cavalry wearing the northern Ming military uniform rushing towards them in a panic. Among these 700 people, only half of them had war horses. There were also some that only borrowed the power of their legs and held their ponytails. It seemed that this was the only way they would not fall behind. Only then would they be able to live and die with the main force. There are more than 700 people. Commander Zhuai Feng, let's send a signal for reinforcements. This company commander only led 100 people. Seeing that the enemy was 7 times their number, he could not help but feel nervous. This was the Ming Liaodong cavalry. It was rumored that they were very powerful. Even the heavy cavalry regiment had suffered a loss in their hands. Chapter 1341. Zhuai Feng naturally saw the enemy's numbers, but he wasn't as flustered as the company commander beside him. Instead, he carefully looked through his binoculars and shook his head. Look, although the enemy has a lot of people, they are clearly defeated soldiers. The army has no formation and has no morale. So, what if there are more of them? Although we only have 100 people, we can wait patiently. The morale of the army is not something the enemy can match. What is there to fear? Hearing Zhuai Feng's bold words, the company commander understood why he could become a regiment commander. Moreover, he was the regiment commander of the heavy cavalry regiment. He wasn't any worse than a normal division commander. It turned out that she was this daring and daring. Just this point alone was something that the current him could not compare to. Admiring Zhui Feng's courage, the company commander was also encouraged. Regiment Commander Zhui, you mean to say that we don't need to ask for help and can eat them with our own strength? That's right, this is a great merit. Could it be that everyone doesn't want to contribute? Zhui Feng was clear that these weren't soldiers of the heavy cavalry regiment. If he wanted to use his status as a regiment commander to suppress them, it wouldn't be too effective. Thus, he could only use benefits to entice them. The military merits of the 5-star army were not bad rewards. This was the magic weapon to defeat the enemy. When it came to contributions, the eyes of the 100 soldiers couldn't help but shine. Then, there was the sound of rapid breathing. After a few breaths, the company commander had already made a decision and said, "Regiment Commander Zhui, we will listen to you. We will do whatever you say." Zhui Feng was waiting for this sentence. He immediately replied with a good, and then ordered, "Everyone, don't be anxious. After all, we are still at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. In a moment, we will divide into 10 groups and surround them. When the enemy is within 100 steps, we will suddenly use bows and arrows to attack from afar. Then, the 1st to 7th groups will charge out. The 8th to 10th groups will stay in place and continuously appear. This will give the enemy the feeling that we have a lot of troops and trick them. You understand?" As if he felt that he had not said enough, wind-chasing Wolf added, "Of course, you don't have to be afraid. If the enemy's momentum is too strong, we can retreat. Then we can send a signal and surround them with the other company commanders." Whether it was advancing or retreating, all of them had already been chosen. The warriors were no longer flustered, and they began to prepare according to the tactics that Windchaser had arranged. After the 100-man team was dispersed, it gave people the impression that their military strength had doubled, and there were hundreds of them. Just as the soldiers of each company reached their designated positions, the defeated Ming Liaodong cavalry arrived within 100 steps of them. Windchaser took the lead and shot out an arrow. A Ming Liaodong cavalry soldier at the front fell off his horse. Following that, another wave of arrows shot out and dozens of enemy soldiers were ambushed. This sudden attack caused the northern Ming kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry, who were already trembling with fear, to become even more chaotic. It was at this moment that Zhui Feng led 7 squads of warriors and charged out from the shadows, loudly shouting that those who surrendered would not be killed. Behind them, there was a cloud of dust. Those were the 30 warriors who were left behind, constantly running back and forth, creating a commotion to strengthen their momentum. The sudden appearance of the 5-star army was like a heavenly army descending from the heavens. It gave the Ming Liaodong cavalry a heavy psychological blow. They were already like arrows at the end of their flight. Right now, they were already like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Any movement would cause them to feel fear. The Ming Liaodong cavalry had already lost their basic judgment. When they saw the cloud of dust behind the 5-star army, they naturally thought that the main force of the 5-star army had arrived. They had already lost their will to fight. When they heard the shouts of those who surrendered would not be killed, they didn't stop at all. One by one, they threw down their weapons, jumped off their horses, and knelt on the ground. Perhaps in the hearts of these Ming Liaodong cavalry, surrendering was not something shameful. As long as they could live, it was good. Just like on Qian Mountain, facing the barrage of guns and cannons, they couldn't find a way to surrender even if they wanted to. Now that the hope of living was in front of them, who wouldn't cherish it? This was like someone giving you a pillow when you were sleepy. Who would care if the pillow was suitable for your head? Zhui Feng was already prepared for a bloody battle. In his heart, unless it was necessary, he didn't want to ask for help from the other companies. After all, he had just lost a battle, and now was the time to gain merit. He didn't want to let go of this opportunity. However, he never would have thought that these Beiming Liaodong cavalry would be so weak. After he jumped out with his men, they surrendered without a trace of struggle. This made him wonder if these were the elite Beiming Liaodong cavalry that had surrounded his heavy cavalry regiment. While Zhuge Feng was doubting, how could the nearby five-star army officers not be thinking the same thing? In a short period of time, it wasn't just this company that had encountered the enemy. Many of the five-star army soldiers who were lying in ambush were also like this. The one similarity was that when they suddenly charged out, the Beiming Liaodong cavalry all chose to kneel and surrender. Under the lack of morale, who knew how many people had already chosen the path of surrender? They just didn't have the opportunity to do so before. But now that the opportunity had come, of course, they had to firmly grasp it. Things were far simpler than imagined. Before the sky turned dark, the battle reports from the various companies were gathered before the several commanders and division commanders. From the statistics, in just a single day's time, they captured no less than 40,000 northern Ming Liaodong iron cavalry. This was 40,000 people. If they wanted to capture 40,000 pigs alive, who knew how much effort it would take? From this, it could be seen that the Beiming Liaodong cavalry's morale was already in chaos, and they had no will to fight. The most exaggerated thing was that they learned about the battle at Chiyun Mountain from the captives. When they learned that Yang Qindong only led 2,000 black cavalry and blocked the attacks of nearly 100,000 Beiming Liaodong cavalry for more than a day, and even heavily injured 40,000 people, everyone was so shocked that their jaws dropped. 2,000 against 100,000. Not only did they obtain victory, they also killed 40,000 people and forced the others to retreat. What kind of combat power did they have to be able to accomplish this? Seeing this result, even the always confident Commander Tian, who couldn't help but sigh, the Black Cavalry is so strong that our 1st Cavalry Division can't compare. After this battle, it was completely established that the Black Cavalry was the strongest army in the entire 5-star army. Although many people knew that the reason why they won was because of the great contributions of the guns and cannons, they couldn't help but admit that just the courage of 2,000 against 100,000 was not something an ordinary person could do. In just one day, they had captured 40,000 captives. This gave the 5-star army more confidence. The only fly in the ointment was that they didn't find their commander Fong Dingshan among the captives. According to the captives, their commander was protected by another general, Mu Qiong, and 2,000 people were together. There's no need to say more. From all the facts, Fong Dingshan still hasn't broken out of the encirclement. If I were him, I would definitely choose a place to break out of the encirclement tonight. After Tian, who heard this, he expressed his thoughts in front of the new 2nd Army's commander Shi Bei and the 101st Army's commander Lu Zhua. This point coincided with Shi Bei and Lu Zhua's thoughts. After the three of them looked at each other, they finally decided that the 1st Cavalry Division would take the initiative to find the enemy. In terms of individual combat power, the 1st Cavalry Division was naturally the strongest existence. Only by taking the initiative could they achieve the goal of finding and eliminating the enemy. Okay, our new 2nd Army will take the initiative to cooperate and shrink the encirclement to prevent the enemy from escaping. Shi Bei was very convinced by the 1st Cavalry Division. He also didn't forget how they had given him war horses when he was in trouble. Shi Bei took the initiative to cooperate. Although Lu Zhua also wanted to lead the troops to gain merit, he also knew that the bigger picture was more important. He immediately made the same promise. Many thanks. Please don't worry. Our 1st Cavalry Division won't disappoint you. Tian, who took the initiative to salute Shi Bei, and Lu Zhua then strode out of the tent. Not long after, the 1st Cavalry Division's camp was bustling with activity. The army set out and disappeared into the night. 50 miles away from the encirclement of the 5-star army, in a valley called Luoshan Hill, Fong Dingshan, who had already woken up, was looking up at the sky with a worried expression. At this time, the sky was already completely dark. There were already many stars in the sky. He still remembered that, at this time 2 days ago, he had close to 100,000 soldiers and was surrounded by Bugnam of Gojoseon's 2,000 cavalry. Who would have thought that in such a short period of time, the situation would become completely different? 100,000 elite cavalry had been defeated. Now, he only had 2,000 men by his side. Moreover, he had already lost his provisions. More importantly, he had lost his morale. How could he win a battle with such an army? Even if he could escape this time, even if the Daizong Emperor spared him, it would be difficult for him to do anything. He had lost his job, lost his army, and wasted countless Baiming's money. How could he still have the face to live in this world, rather than go back and be looked down upon, or even be impeached by others? It would be better to die on the battlefield. Instead, he would leave behind a heroic reputation. His right hand slowly touched the right side of his waist. However, when he touched it, he discovered that the scabbard was still there, but the blade was nowhere to be seen. At this time, he remembered that when he was unconscious, he felt the weight on his waist loosen. Now that he thought about it, his weapon should have been taken away at that time. Needless to say, this matter was definitely done by Mu Qiong. He probably already knew that he would do something, but what could he say when the other party did it for his own good? AI. With a sigh, Fong Dingshan's eyes lost all color. He was like a walking corpse. At this time, he had no hope for the future. Chapter 1342. In a large tent less than 100 meters away from Fong Dingshan, Mu Qiong was discussing the future with several generals. The army had been defeated, and it was not something that could be salvaged by saying anything. The most important thing right now was how to escape from this place. No matter what, they could not be caught. The scouts have already reported that the soldiers who tried to break out during the day have all been captured. From this, it can be seen that the 5-star army has already set up an inescapable net. Even a bird would find it hard to fly out. As the host of the meeting, Mu Qiong stood at the head of the table and sighed as he spoke. His words caused the others in the meeting to lower their heads in silence. They could not escape, and surrendering was also impossible. Doing so would only implicate their loved ones in the capital. Where should they go from here? Seeing that no one spoke, Mu Qiong could guess their thoughts. Then, without any warning, he suddenly asked, "I ask all of you, are you afraid of death?" This question had been discussed countless times since ancient times. Moreover, there was no need to debate the results. Everyone was afraid of death. The only difference was to what extent they were afraid of death, and whether there were things more terrifying than death. Just like the current situation, the army had been defeated, and 100,000 elite cavalry were gone just like that. One could imagine how angry the emperor would be once he knew about this. There were also those civil officials in the court. They looked down on generals like them from the bottom of their hearts, and even privately called them ordinary people. In the past, it was the 5-star army that forced them into a corner. The Daizong Emperor wanted to restore the glory of the great Ming dynasty and wanted to use military power to rule the country. However, now that they had lost the battle, it was time for them to jump out and criticize the emperor. If they didn't do so, they wouldn't be able to show their intelligence. If they didn't do so, they wouldn't be able to elevate their status and give them enough benefits. What the result was self-evident. If he escaped back, he might be able to survive. However, his life in the future would not be any better than death. Since being alive was no better than being dead, he might as well die. Of course, the prerequisite was that their deaths had to be worth something. No one answered immediately. Instead, everyone raised their heads to look at Mu Qiong, as if they wanted to ask something. He did not answer immediately, which gave Mu Qiong some confidence. He knew that he could finally speak his mind now. He cleared his throat and continued, "If everyone is afraid of death, then there's nothing to say. Whether you're willing to surrender or break out of the encirclement, this general will not stop you. However, if you are not afraid of death and are unwilling to give up and still want to fight, this general also has a plan that can work. That is, we will fight our way back to Qian Mountain. After such a long time, I believe that Bugnam of Gojoseon will think that we have escaped far away, and will definitely let down his guard. If we suddenly attack and don't give them the time to fire their guns, then it is hard to say who will win and who will lose, but at least we will have a 50% chance of winning. If you can kill Bugnam of Gojoseon, think about it, how great of a meritorious service would that be? Heavens, how is this meritorious service? This is clearly a great service." At this moment, many people sucked in a breath of cold air. Everyone had different expressions, but they quickly calmed down again. When they looked at Mu Qiong, their eyes were filled with excitement as they said, "We are not afraid of death." This showed that they were not afraid of death, which meant that they agreed with Mu Qiong's plan and were determined to fight their way back. Although there would be danger if they went back, wasn't it also more dangerous than breaking out of the encirclement? Since that was the case, why not choose to play a big game? At least if they succeeded, not only would they not be guilty, they would also have a great service. This result was within Mu Qiong's expectations. Now that he finally got a definite answer, he also let out a long sigh of relief and said, "This is good. I can see that everyone is unyielding men. Since that is the case, this general will give the order. We will have a good rest tonight and rush back tomorrow morning. When we suddenly attack at noon, we will definitely be able to kill Bugnam of Gojoseon. At that time, everyone here will become meritorious officials of the great Ming dynasty. It is not impossible for you to be conferred the title of Marquis." The great Ming dynasty had always been conferred the title of Marquis based on military merit, and the title of Marquis was hereditary. It could be imagined that once they were conferred the title, it was equivalent to having a fixed iron rice bowl. In the future, their descendants would be able to enjoy endless benefits. Mu Qiong still had some ability. With just a few words, he stirred up the fighting spirit of the generals. At this moment, they could not wait to appear at the foot of Qian Mountain and kill their way up in one go. If it were not for the fact that the army had not had a good rest these few days, they would probably have done so. Thinking that tomorrow would be the day to show off their skills, the generals excitedly left the main tent and returned to their respective camps to rest. Mu Qiong walked out of the main tent and headed straight to where Fong Dingshan was. Walking over from afar, Mu Qiong looked at the somewhat bleak figure standing there. He took a deep breath and strode forward. Fong Dingshan didn't move when he heard the footsteps behind him. He already knew who they were and even knew what they were planning and discussing. However, he didn't care about it. Even if these people were discussing about surrendering to the 5-star army, he would not find it strange. After all, when facing life and death, a person's true nature would often be revealed. How could a defeated general dare to be brave? At this moment, Fong Dingshan did not ask these subordinates to do anything. Even if these people really wanted to surrender, he would not blame them. However, he would definitely not be with these people. He had received a great favor from the great Ming dynasty, and he could only repay it with his life on the battlefield. "General." Mu Qiong walked up and clasped his fists. Ha! The night sky tonight is really beautiful. Looking up at the sky, Fang Dingshan sighed, emotionally. Perhaps he did not have long to live, but Fang Dingshan looked at everything so beautifully because it was very likely that he would not see it again in the future. Of course, this did not exclude the possibility that the unpolluted sky was indeed much cleaner than in the future. Yes, the night sky is very beautiful. Mu Qiong agreed. But we will probably see more of this kind of night sky in the future. Perhaps the night sky in the capital will be even more beautiful than here. When he heard the first half of the sentence, Fang Dingshan's expression did not change. However, when he heard the second half, his body suddenly trembled. He had heard many different meanings from these words. What did he mean by "it will be even more beautiful than here"? What did he mean by "the night sky in the capital will be even more beautiful than here"? Could it be that Mu Qiong was not prepared to surrender to the enemy? Could it be that he had misunderstood him? While Fang Dingshan was still thinking, Mu Qiong half knelt behind him. "General, this subordinate is guilty. This subordinate should not have hidden the counterattack plan from you. This way, everyone will have a slim chance of survival. However, we cannot just leave like this. We must take a gamble. General, please punish us." Mu Qiong had to apologize. Although there were only 2,000 cavalry in the camp, Fang Dingshan was still the great general. Logically speaking, this kind of plan should not have been hidden from him. However, he was worried that his idea would not be approved. In addition, Fang Dingshan seemed to have lost his morale, so he had no choice but to go around him. Now that the plan had been decided, he naturally had to tell the truth. Fang Dingshan had already accepted his fate. He had already prepared himself to borrow a knife and commit suicide the moment Mu Qiong spoke of surrendering. He was sure that the other party would agree to this request. However, he did not expect that they would actually want to counterattack. For a moment, his expression changed continuously. Chapter 1343. At this time, outside the big tent of the northern Ming kingdom's Liaodong cavalry, bright red 5-star flags stood in great numbers. Looking from afar, the dense cavalry had already surrounded this temporary stronghold in all directions. The 1st Cavalry Division didn't rest for the whole night. Instead, they were constantly searching for traces of the enemy. Finally, when it was almost dawn, they found a large stronghold. The commander of the 5th Cavalry Division, Gong Feng, who was in charge of searching this area, ordered his men to heavily surround this place. Gong Feng did not give the order to attack immediately. He had already made a rough calculation. There were only about 2,000 northern Ming cavalrymen that were surrounded. He had led 5 regiments of 4,000 elite cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, he had twice the number of the enemy. In terms of combat strength, he was full of confidence. What was there to be brave about? What was there to be afraid of? In the previous telegram, Yang Chendong emphasized that these original Baiming Liaodong cavalry were all elites. They had consumed a lot of money and food from the Baiming Emperor to create them. If they could be used as their own, it would save a lot of training time. Wasn't the 1st Cavalry Division going to be expanded by a division? Excellent soldiers were essential. If they captured these Baiming cavalry, it would save a lot of effort. Gong Feng, who had his own plans, didn't immediately attack. He wanted to take a look and carefully observe these Baiming cavalry. He wanted to see if they had the qualifications to become soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army. He wanted to properly lock them up. As for whether or not these people would be able to escape from his hands, Gong Feng was even less worried. He had brought along the elite soldiers of the 5th Regiment, and he still had many excellent Big Dipper crossbows in his hands that he had yet to use. If these people were really very brave, not to mention other things, if a wave of crossbows were released, would he still be afraid that they would be able to overturn the sky? Even if they didn't have 7-star crossbows, with the 1st Cavalry Division's elite cavalry, how could they be afraid of these 2,000 Ming cavalry? Gong Feng's face was full of pride and confidence, but when he spoke, he didn't have the slightest intention of underestimating the enemy. Men, surround this place. Don't be careless. I believe everyone understands the principle of cornered beasts fighting. Battalion commanders, go do it. Yes. The 10 battalion commanders immediately gave a standard military salute before turning around and heading back to their respective units. The camp was completely surrounded. When Fang Dingshan, Mu Qiong, and the others woke up from their tents, this was the scene that greeted them. They were surrounded by the cavalry of the 5-star army. However, with the continuous development of technology, like the appearance of the 7-star crossbow, shooting arrows became simple. One only needed to load the front of the crossbow and pull the bow to fully draw it once. Then, 7 arrows could be shot. This saved a lot of effort and had great power. Facing such a tyrannical weapon, how could the Ming Liaodong cavalry block it? With just the sound of the trigger being pulled, the crossbow bolts rained down like rain. The 500 northern Ming Liaodong cavalry charging at the front were all shot down by the crossbow bolts. The seemingly powerful attack also stopped because of this. Then, their morale plummeted. This also caused the hundreds of Ming Liaodong cavalry, who were preparing to charge, to stop. They were humans, not gods. Facing arrows that could take their lives, they had to show hesitation. This hesitation caused their morale to plummet. The Ming Liaodong cavalry, who were still red-eyed and wanted to charge, had their combat power reduced by more than a level. This scene was also seen by Mu Qiong, who was behind them. From the moment he slashed Fang Dingshan with his saber, he had already gone crazy. Now that he saw that the front troops were injured and the middle troops were not moving forward, he was immediately enraged. Come on, charge with me. Mu Qiong was afraid that their morale would drop and they would lose the opportunity to charge out of the encirclement. He was prepared to charge himself and set an example. Come. Gong Feng also let out a loud cry when he saw another armored general charge out from the enemy camp with less than 200 men beside him. He also laughed out loud and leaped forward. As Gong Feng rushed out, a battalion of 400 cavalrymen followed behind him. Their duty was to protect the safety of their commander. Gong Feng Chong had his reasons. Just like how the northern Ming Liaodong cavalry always wanted to have a direct PK with the world's 1st Cavalry Division, how could they not have this idea? Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, Gong Feng immediately seized it and leapt out. One side had 400 people, while the other side had 200. Although there was a difference in numbers, it wasn't too big. If the Ming Liaodong cavalry were really elite, they could make up for this difference. Just like how the 1st Cavalry Division dared to attack thousands of enemy cavalry with only a few hundred people. And just now, after the exchange with Mu Qiong, he realized that there were also powerful people in the Ming army. This reignited his fighting spirit. While he stopped looking down on his opponent, his left hand unconsciously reached for his waist. There was a saber there. It was the dual saber technique that everyone in the 1st Cavalry Division had to learn. It could be used to win and save lives at critical moments. The two of them rode back. Regardless of whether they were willing or not, another clash had begun. As the war horses of both sides continued to accelerate, the distance between them grew closer and closer. Soon after, the sound of collisions could be heard again. In a short period of time, Mu Qiong had continuously slashed out 3 times with his saber.
The first two of the 3 slashes were still a clash. Their strengths were equally matched. But when it came to the 3rd slash, Gong Feng seemed to have no strength to attack. He changed from slashing to blocking. Gong Feng seemed to be exhausted. When Mu Qiong saw this, he was naturally overjoyed. He originally thought that his opponent was a fierce man. If that was the case, it would be difficult for him to win. If he wasn't careful, he might even lose his life here. But this 3rd slash had reignited his hope. He used all his strength and slashed out a 4th time when the 2 horses were about to cross paths. He wanted to see how he would block the 4th slash if he already had to block the 3rd slash. Mu Qiong had a confident smile on his face, as if victory was already in sight. But this smile quickly froze on his face, because when he slashed out for the 4th time, he suddenly felt a pain in his back. Because of this, more than half of the strength in his body dissipated. The saber that he forcefully slashed out only hit the edge of Gong Feng's saber before it bounced back. This was all thanks to the fact that the 2 horses had already separated. Otherwise, if Gong Feng counterattacked while he was injured, Mu Qiong wouldn't have been able to escape even if he wanted to. The 2 horses separated for the 2nd time. The distance between them increased. When they reached a certain point, Gong Feng turned his horse around. At this moment, his eyes were glowing. Just now, he had drawn his other saber and attacked Mu Qiong with his left saber. This also meant that his next opponent was only a disabled person. Naturally, he was full of confidence. He wanted to see how his opponent would fare in the next clash. Gong Feng was in high spirits. He was ready for the next clash. Mu Qiong's expression was much worse. The back of his waist was still bleeding. His strength was also fading. If he didn't have great willpower, he might have already fallen off his horse. Mu Qiong forced himself to take a deep breath and recover his energy. As he turned his horse around, he also tore off a piece of his battle robe and wrapped it around his waist. Although this was of limited use, it could at least slow down the flow of blood. This gave him the strength to fight again. Charge! After feeling better and regaining some of his strength, Mu Qiong shouted again and charged in Gong Feng's direction. When 2 armies fought, there would naturally be chaos. Most of the time, it would be a chaotic battle. This depended on the strength of each army and their understanding of formations. But in a chaotic battle, everyone was in danger. After all, no one knew where a saber would suddenly come from and take your life. Thus, luck played a large part in a big battle. This was also why most generals wouldn't take the initiative to charge. If they were unlucky and were struck by a saber the moment they charged into the enemy camp, wouldn't they die an unjust death? As for the battle between the generals of both sides, that was even more impossible. Think about how difficult it was to nurture a general. Why would they waste it in a one-on-one battle? That was only done in movies and TV dramas to create a tense and exciting atmosphere. But now, the real scene was really happening. Gong Feng and Mu Qiong were really in a one-on-one battle to the death. The other warriors and soldiers also saw this, but no one went to stop him. Perhaps they had been warned before, or perhaps they were full of confidence in their general. Since no one stopped them, Mu Qiong could only brace himself and charge forward. If it was any other time, he could retreat if he was injured and no one would say anything. But now, he was Baiming the Liaodong cavalry's morale was tied to him. If he was defeated and retreated, the result could be imagined. There would be no chance for a comeback. In order to survive, in order to appear at the foot of Qian Mountain and deal a fatal blow to Yang Chendong, Mu Qiong was going all out. Ayaya! He shouted loudly as if he wanted to convey all his strength through his mouth. Mu Qiong was getting closer and closer to Gong Feng. Then he raised his saber high and slashed down from the sky. At this time,
Mu Qiong had given up on defense. He only cared about attacking. Even if he died, he would severely injure Gong Feng to prove his strength. Gong Feng was not frightened by the other party's shouting. On the contrary, he stopped his war horse. He did not want to give the other party a chance to turn back. The other party was already injured. Next, it was time for him to expand his victory. Relying on the horse's momentum and speed, Mu Qiangyuan's saber strike was not weak. With just one strike, he was able to bend Gong Feng's body, who had raised his saber to block. Mu Qiong's face flashed with a full smile. He was confident that he now had the upper hand. Next, as long as the other party relaxed, he would be able to cut Gong Feng in half. But when he still had that smile on his face, his abdomen hurt again. Another saber appeared and slashed in front of him. At this moment, Mu Qiong finally knew how he was injured, but it was too late. When blood flew out in front of and behind him, he had less than 20% of his strength left. It was already extremely difficult for him to stand on his horse. How could he have the strength to fight to the death? Due to the excessive blood loss, Mu Qiong's body became weak and his vision became blurry. Mu Qiong could vaguely see a blade coming towards the door. He instinctively wanted to dodge, but his reaction was already very slow. Just as he moved his head slightly, the blade had already landed on his neck. His aorta was cut open and blood spurted out. With a plop, Mu Qiong, who had no strength left, fell off his horse. He fell to the ground and twitched for a moment before he stopped breathing. Mu Qiong was dead. He died under Gong Feng's two sabers. And the moment he fell to the ground, Gong Feng had already bent over and stood up. His head was still covered in blood in his hand. A loud shout immediately rang out on the battlefield. The enemy general is dead. Do you still want to continue struggling? Surrender, and you will be spared. Surrender, and you'll be spared. The 4,000 brave soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division also shouted in unison. The 4,000 people shouted in unison, giving one a feeling of covering the sun. In that instant, some of the more cowardly Ming Liaodong cavalry already couldn't help but throw away the sabers in their hands. Their faces were filled with horror. On the battlefield, there weren't many left of the 200 cavalry Mu Qiong brought. They didn't have enough troops to begin with, and their morale was low. How could they be a match for the 5-star Army's cavalry? Not to mention, after a series of fierce battles, many Ming Liaodong cavalry sabers were already broken in half. They couldn't pose any threat or harm to the enemy at all. How could they possibly win without even having weapons? This was where the 5-star Army's strength lay. This was especially true for an elite cavalry troop like the 1st Cavalry Division. The sabers in their hands were all forged in the Crimson City's arsenal. Be it in terms of sharpness or toughness, they were far superior to other swords. Chapter 1345. Perhaps nothing could be seen at the beginning of the collision, but after a long time, it was very common for weapons to break. The soldiers were brave, the weapons were elite, and the rewards and punishments were clear. It was hard to find anyone who could be a match for such a team. Shouts rang out from all directions. With every shout, the 4,500 cavalrymen would take a step forward. Under this kind of intimidation, killing intent surged forth. More and more northern Ming Liaodong cavalrymen threw their weapons to the ground. There were even some who were frightened by this momentum and had already dismounted and knelt on the ground, acting as if they were surrendering. Mu Qiong was killed, and his head was cut off. Now, it was on Gong Feng's cavalry sword. Fang Dingshan was injured and fell to the ground. He could no longer ride or command the army. Without their commander, the northern Ming Liaodong cavalry finally saw the situation clearly. They knew that they had lost the upper hand. Immediately, more and more of them threw down their weapons and surrendered. Of the 2,000 cavalry, 600 were killed or injured. The rest surrendered. After surrendering, Gongfeng knew what kind of big fish he had encountered this time. He had killed the third fierce general of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry, Mu Qiong, and captured the Baiming general Fang Dingshan. This was definitely a great achievement. Laughing heartily, Gongfeng immediately ordered the scouts to spread the news in all directions. After that, he brought the 5 regiments of warriors and personally escorted the 1,600 northern Ming cavalrymen to the main camp. The poor Fang Dingshan was being carried under a simple stretcher. The wounds on his body had been treated, and he was no longer bleeding. His mouth was also stuffed with a piece of cloth that someone had used before, and it smelled very bad. This was not to humiliate him, but to prevent him from biting his tongue and committing suicide. On Qian Mountain, Yang Qindong and 2,000 Black Knight Dragon Guards had already finished cleaning up the battlefield. An incomparably huge dying monastery and more than 10 smaller dying monasteries had already been built. There were simply too many severed heads. It was impossible to put them all together, so they could only be divided into a dozen or so. However, it was precisely because of this that it gave off a very frightening feeling from afar. It was as if there were countless severed heads. When Division Commander Tian, who brought the First Star Army to the foot of Qian Mountain, he saw this scene. At this moment, even Division Commander Tian, who had killed countless people and never feared any enemy, had a shocked expression. He could no longer count the number of heads in front of him. Were these all killed by the Black Cavalry? They only had 2,000 people. How did they do it? Even if they used firearms, it was 2,000 against 100,000. If they were careless and the enemy cavalry charged up the mountain, the consequences would be very serious. Although he had always been modest on the surface, Tian, who was very prideful deep down, he believed that no one in the 5-star army was a match for them in terms of cold weapons. Even the Black Cavalry by his teacher's side was only on par with them. But now this thought had to change. The Black Cavalry was the Black Cavalry. It was not something that the 1st Cavalry Division could compare to. In just this battle alone, they had killed tens of thousands of enemies. Their opponent was the Baiming Liaodong Cavalry. They were the most elite existence in the Baiming army and could be compared to the Imperial Army in the capital. This was because the Black Cavalry's main mission was to protect Yang Qindong and did not have many opportunities to kill enemies. If they were like the 1st Cavalry Division and participated in every battle, their achievements would be much greater than his. Tian, who had a frightened expression, but he did not think that it was precisely because the Baiming Liaodong Cavalry that they had strict military discipline that they left tens of thousands of corpses here. If it was any other Baiming army, most of the people would have run away as soon as the guns were fired. How could they kill so many people? On the mountain, Yang Qindong had already seen Tian, whose army appear. At this point, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Yang Qindong was a little nervous. This was not because he was afraid that the enemy would return. With the firearms and ammunition prepared on the mountain, it would not be a problem if 100,000 enemies came. He was nervous because he did not want to kill more Han soldiers. Before, he had no choice. It was either you die or I die. Of course, he had to protect himself. Now that Tian, who had appeared here with his army, it was enough to prove that the situation was settled. At least he did not have to kill Han soldiers. This was enough to let him breathe a sigh of relief. After Tian, who arrived and saw Yang Qindong on the mountain, his expression became more respectful, and he greeted his teacher. Yang Qindong could guess that Tian, who must have been shaken by the news. This was also good. He could remind him from time to time so that he would not become arrogant. Therefore, in the following time, he did not introduce too much about the Battle of Chiyun Mountain. Instead, he lightly skimmed over it. He only said that the black cavalry risked their lives, and Ming Liaodong cavalry could not withstand a single blow. However, these words in Tianhu's ears made him even more frightened. The Ming Liaodong cavalry was the elite Ming army. How could they not withstand a single blow? Didn't this show the strength of his teacher and the black cavalry under his feet? The battle on the mountain was skimmed over